Hello readers by eyes and by ears, this is Mari Chan and welcome back to my channel. Today we are continuing with another reading of Ballad of Sword and Wine Volume 4, also known as Tang Jiu by Tang Jiu Qing. I hope you all enjoy and let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Chapter 135, Earring. The rain stopped the next day, but the sky was still blanketed in gray clouds. Concubine Cai, after being rebuked the day before, claimed illness before dawn and remained in her chambers. Luo Mu had not slept well either. After his breakfast, a servant came to report that Cai Yu had sent him an invitation to a small gathering. Luo Mu accepted, knowing full well the purpose behind Cai Yu's summons. He wiped his hands. Without even changing his robe, he said, "Prepare the sedan. I'll go over now. Let's not keep my brother-in-law waiting." Cai Yu was a prominent bandit in Chazhou, whom even Yan Hezhu of Hezhou addressed as Pa. He was generous with his money and made a point of offering financial assistance to various smaller bandits, and thus had a warm reputation among them as a loyal and righteous man who was always ready to help. However, he did not get along with Lei Chongming from Mount Luo, though no one could say why. All they knew was that before Lei Chongming's death, neither one would acknowledge the other's existence during the bandits' gatherings and feasts. By the time Luo Mu arrived at Cai Manor, Cai Yu had treated his guests to a round of food and drinks. Cai Yu's manor was even more luxuriously appointed than Luo Mu's, and kept running by more than 1,000 servants. However, he was not a man who was particular about formalities. Most of his visitors were bandits and robbers. The gatherings he held were lusty feasts that boasted all manner of roast meats and strong drink. The moment Cai Yu saw Luo Mu, he leaned back in his chair and beckoned him over with a smile. "Meng Zhang, you're late. As punishment, you have to drink 3 cups of wine. Come, take a seat." Luo Mu had always been submissive before Cai Yu. He complied at once and settled himself. Even when he saw the unusually dressed strangers at the table, he asked no questions. Cai Yu waited for Luo Mu to finish his drinks before speaking. "I heard my little sister displeased you yesterday." Looking panicked, Luo Mu started, "Brother, you were right to tell her off." Cai Yu laid a heavy hand on Luo Mu's arm and said with a smile, "You're her husband. The man is in charge of the front hall. There are plenty of things that are none of her business. She's been spoiled at home, and it seems getting married didn't teach her any better. In the future, you can just tell her off when you need to. Don't hold back on my account. Her tantrums are getting out of hand." Cai Yu spoke of what happened in Luo Mu's inner chambers as if he'd been there himself. His hand on Luo Mu's arm didn't apply much pressure, but it was precisely this light touch that showed the scope of his control. If he told Luo Mu to head left, Luo Mu wouldn't dare go right. Luo Mu was an official who had passed the imperial examinations to enter government service in Chudu the proper way and had undergone official reviews before receiving this governing post. But what did any of that matter? In Chazhou, Luo Mu was nothing but a yes man. Out here, heaven was high and the emperor was far. Such remote cities were beyond the reach of central authorities. Banditry in Zhongbo had been a serious issue as far back as the reign of Yongyi. Before the fall of Zhongbo, the bandits here didn't give 2 hoots about their lord Shanwei, Prince of Jianxing. And after the massacre of the cities, they gave even less of a damn about anything, or anyone, from Chudu. A sheen of sweat covered Luo Mu's brow. Satisfied with this reaction, Cai Yu retracted his hand and laughed. "Do you know, I've been hearing such bizarre news. Half a month ago, I heard there was going to be a new emperor on the dragon throne in Chudu. That chief commander of the embroidered uniform guard, Han Cheng, was so anxious he scampered back to his hometown to dig up some child to be the imperial heir. Well, who would have expected Secretariat Elder Hai would be so upset over it that he bashed his head into a column in the Great Hall and killed himself? The way I heard it, blood and brains splattered all over Han Cheng, and he got so scared he pissed himself right there." Everyone burst out laughing. The rumors circulating in Zhongbo had long rendered Han Cheng as a sniveling scoundrel who bowed and scraped before the throne's authority. After Cai Yu was done laughing, he huffed out a long sigh. Even though we bandits make shady deals and work outside of the law, we value loyalty and benevolence as much as any man. I have nothing but respect for the Secretariat Elder for what he did. As the saying goes, men who wield swords die in battles, while men who wield brushes die in remonstration. Our great Zhou has been through 3 rulers in such a short time. Emperors are dying one after another, and upright ministers like Secretariat Elder Hai are rarer by the day. Luo Mu listened in silence, never looking up from his bowl. He seemed wholly focused on eating, though he only dared pick at the food set right before him, lest he draw attention to himself. Although he was dignified in appearance, his behavior gave the impression of someone weak and cowering. Cai Yu did not look at Luo Mu again. He was speaking with gusto now. But I bet even the Secretariat Elder himself didn't expect the throne he kept from the Han clan's child to go to a woman. Have you ever heard of such a thing since the founding of our great Zhou? Is this not a violation of the natural order? An upending of yin and yang? This is an omen signaling the collapse of the empire. I'd rather follow the rules of an ignorant child than a woman. How can any red-blooded man pay obedience to a woman? Sure, Qidong has Tang Jiu Qing, but if you ask me, she just happened to be in the right place at the right time and took advantage of the Empress Dowager being in power. Otherwise, where would she get off being a marshal? If Chudu has a female emperor next, what a mess. A chorus of agreement rose all around. One man with a beard smacked the table and said, Elder Tai is right. That's just what it is. What the hell even is a female emperor? The last few emperors were awful indeed, but the law of heaven is just as Lao Tzu Xianzhang said. Footnote number 4, Lao Tzu, a Chinese philosopher considered the founder of Taoism and author of the classic Tao Te Ching. The man is in charge of administration. There's no way I'll let myself be ruled by a woman. Even if the entire court of civil and military officials bends their knees and pays her obedience as subjects to a monarch, well, that just makes them a nest of sniveling cowards. It's no wonder they left the 12 tribes of Biansha harass us all these years. When it comes to women, marrying and keeping the home are their duties. Cai Yu agreed. No harm done if we dote on them a little and raise them into pampered, delicate ladies. But if you let them go out and fight battles or lead the government, it's a disaster waiting to happen. He sighed with emotion. I heard the students in Chudu are all for her. I'd say all that studying turned them stupid. They can't even tell right from wrong. Their conversation ranged from the political battles in Chudu to the military affairs in Qidong, and then to the ongoing war in Libei. Finally, the topic landed on Lei Chongming. The bearded man spoke up again. Lei Chongming was another one who got a lucky break. He just happened to be in the right spot to help Yan Gongza out when he was in distress. A man like him would never have lasted long. He was too ambitious. He wanted to establish a regular army in Mount Luo. Well, sure enough, the imperial army went and took him down. Cai Yu snorted coldly. The man next to him said, Elder Tai and Lei Chongming were hailed as the twin heroes of Zhongbo. But how does Lei Chongming deserve such an honor? He never even came close to our Elder Tai. Cai Yu was unmoved by this flattery. He spread his arms wide and sank comfortably back into the chair. Do you know why I turned my nose up at Lei Chongming? Because I find him filthy. The maid-servant came over with his pipe, and he took 2 puffs before continuing. Lei Chongming worked as an armed escort for merchant caravans in his earlier years. Everyone knows that part. But do you know why he stopped? He claimed it was because he married his younger sister off to the Zhu family in Duanzhou, and he wanted to retire and live in comfort. But that's not it. You see, he had a particular vice. Oh, God. At some point, Luo Mu had set aside his chopsticks. Blowing out a cloud of smoke, Cai Yu continued. When I first took up this trade and was ready to strike out on my own, my shifu told me one must be a righteous man even as a bandit or a robber. There are some things you must not touch. Depraved acts will bring you bad karma. Plenty of traveling merchants with families come through Chaozhou, but I've never laid my hands on any of the widows or orphans I've come across. but not Lei Changming. He used to accompany some families as an armed escort. One time, when he was on a job in Dengzhou, the man of the house died in the middle of the journey, leaving a hapless orphan and a widow who couldn't even afford to pay his wages. When they arrived in Dengzhou, the man's family only wanted their grandson, not the daughter-in-law. The woman was unwilling to part with her child and planned to kill herself in desperation. Lei Changming brought the mother and son back home with him, saying he'd provide for them both. I was still a young robber in Chazhou at the time. When I heard about this incident, I thought, what a man! I felt Lei Changming was different from people like me. He was the kind of chivalrous hero my shifu spoke of. I thought highly of him, and I always kept an eye out for him when I was on the road working. I wanted to find a chance to become sworn brothers with the man, but later, when I went to Dengzhou, I heard he quit. When I tracked him down, I learned both the woman and child had died. How did they die, you ask? He brutalized them after drinking one night. He laid his hands on a child no more than 6 years of age. The woman resisted, so he beat her to death. The child was tortured beyond recognition and died just a few days after his mother. Cai Yu waved away the smoke and frowned as he gestured for the maidservant to take the pipe away. When he popped up again in Duanzhou, this vice of his didn't change. Lei Changming valued his reputation, so he never dared indulge too openly. Young Master Yan was very young when Lei Changming saved him. I was friends with old Master Yan back then, and the Yan clan had helped me out a time or two. Even though I hadn't met the young master back then, I thought of him as my own treasured child. When I heard Lei Changming had him, I ran for 4 days and nights without rest to get to Mount Luo and get him back. The young master wore a bright jade earring at the time, a gift from his family, making him look all the more precious. He was smart as a whip, too. The second he saw me, he called me Pa. It was hard not to feel protective of the kid. Since the younger master seemed unharmed, I didn't bother pushing the point with Lei Changming. Yet afterward, Lei Changming had felt self-conscious every time he encountered Cai Yu. He knew Cai Yu looked down on him, so he stayed away. They each kept to themselves. And the young master is a good kid. He was grateful to Lei Changming for saving him, so he helped the bandits of Mount Luo more than a few times. Cai Yu had meant to ask Luo Mu about Kongling today, but he'd gotten carried away recounting the past. By the time he remembered, Luo Mu had taken his leave. Luo Mu climbed into his sedan and headed for the cosmetic shop, hoping to buy some of the rouge that was all the rage in Chudu to pacify concubine Cai. The largest cosmetic shop in Chazhou was owned by a merchant from Jueshi, and Luo Mu was a regular there. Almost before he stepped off the sedan, the shopkeeper was coming out to welcome him and serve him tea. He bent toward Luo Mu and said, "Apologies, Your Excellency. Unfortunately, we're short on stock today. All our best powders are being prepared in the shop on the east end of the city and won't be here for some time. What if we deliver them to your residence tomorrow? Would that be all right?" Luo Mu nodded and turned to leave when he recalled the way Cai Yu had pressed down on his arm earlier. Changing his mind, he looked back and asked, "Which shop on the east end?" The shopkeeper called over a runner to personally lead the way for Luo Mu. Upon arrival, Luo Mu noted that while the eastern shop was not large, its location was close to the horse paths used to transport cargo and convenient for loading and unloading goods. Only a few people were browsing inside. The runner led him further in, to a courtyard at the back of the shop, then served him tea and asked him to wait. Luo Mu sat for a long time. When the hanging screen lifted at last, it was Kong Ling who walked through. Astonished, Luo Mu started, "What are you—" In lieu of an answer, Kong Ling held up the curtain and stepped aside, making way for a man in white who ducked slightly to enter. The instant Shan Zichuan raised his head, Luo Mu rose to his feet. Shan Zichuan had come in a sedan and was neat and dry despite the pouring rain. He gestured for Luo Mu to sit. Behind him, Qiao Tianya stepped forward and switched out the tea for a fresh pot, then handed a steaming cup to Shan Zichuan. Seeing Luo Mu still standing, Kong Ling began, "Meng Zheng, this is Vice Commander Shen." Luo Mu bowed respectfully. "I've long heard the Vice Commander's reputation. This pupil Luo Mengzheng is glad to receive your wise teachings. Mr. Cheng Feng has spoken highly of Lord Luo's prudence and excellent judgment. Today, I've seen the truth in his words. Shen Zichuan smiled faintly. I am no longer the vice commander of the embroidered uniform guard. Without an authority token or an official post, I'm merely a common man. It is I who should be paying my respects to your excellency. But how could Luomu dare let this man bow to him? Shen Zichuan had served as an official just steps from the emperor's side. His position as northern judge of the embroidered uniform guard alone was enough to strike fear into the hearts of the prefects of Zhongbo. In the past, the embroidered uniform guard had worked with the Ministry of Justice, the Court of Judicial Review, and the Chief Surveillance Bureau to audit the accounts in the provincial administrations and review the officials' accomplishments. Furthermore, Shen Zichuan was known to be on good terms with Cun Yu of the Chief Surveillance Bureau and Kong Qiu of the Ministry of Justice. Luomu had more than merely heard of him. Ostensibly, the objective of assigning officials like Luomu to posts outside the capital was for them to gain experience. After collecting some political achievements and establishing their credentials, they would be eligible for promotion to an official position in the capital of Chudu. The result of their reviews as an official, the lives of their whole family, lay in the hands of men like Shen Zichuan. It was evident why Luomu called himself this pupil. Shen Zichuan was unlike the high-ranking officials of the embroidered uniform guard who had preceded him. He had an unconventional beginning. His father was Shen Wei, notorious for allowing the Biansha horsemen to slaughter Zhongbo. When he entered the capital 6 years ago, he had been escorted by the embroidered uniform guard who had collected him from the Libei armored cavalry as a prisoner. All the rumors had said he would be executed. Yet not only had he survived, he had been repeatedly promoted by the Tian Chun emperor, defying all rules and traditions. The position of northern judge concerned both factions in Chudu, and yet even Hailiang Yi had given his assent. On top of this, he had achieved it all at such a young age, which was intimidating in and of itself. Only now did Luomu understand that Kong Ling hadn't been putting on airs when he said he was confident of success. He was genuinely certain, and this young man was why. Fortunately for Luomu's nerves, Shen Zichuan was simply making conversation and didn't actually rise to pay his respects. Luomu collected himself, but still didn't dare sit. He stood beside Kong Ling with his hands politely at his sides and said, Please excuse this pupil for not welcoming your excellency after you personally came all this way to Jiazhou. I'll send someone at once to... I followed the Marquis of Dingdu out of the capital. I am now a traitor to Chudu. There is truly no need for your excellency to stand on ceremony. Shen Zichuan took a sip of hot tea to soothe his sore throat. I've been in Zhongbo for some time now, and I've long wanted to meet Lord Luo. I'm fortunate to have Mr. Cheng Feng to make introductions for me today. Kong Ling looked at Luomu and smiled. Mengzheng, there's no need to be so formal. The vice commander has been our staunchest supporter in Suzhou. One of the reasons he's come is to help resolve the issue of bandits in Chazhou. We're all on the same side here. Luomu eyed Kong Ling, his gaze a little more restrained compared to yesterday's. He asked cautiously, How did you know I'd come here? Chazhou is only so big. We can discover many things with just a little asking around. That 14th concubine of yours has strong family backing and a temper to boot, and she loves rouge from Chudu. It's always been your habit to please others by taking note of what they like. It was easy to guess you'd make a personal trip here to pacify the lady. Kong Ling turned to Shen Zichuan with a smile and shook his head. The vice commander ought to know that Mengzheng was very popular with the girls in his student days, and a notorious flirt. He was an expert in flattery even before he became an official. Luomu relaxed slightly when Kong Ling brought up old times. I conducted myself with decorum while studying. When would I have had the chance to flirt when I was with you all day long? The way I remember it, it was you who had countless friends and called everyone your brother. Their familiar banter eased the atmosphere. Kong Ling gestured for Luomu to take a seat. Shen Zichuan sat in the seat of honor, yet when he spoke, it wasn't with the overbearing attitude Luomu had expected. I'm sure Mr. Cheng Feng has shared the purpose of our trip here. You two didn't have time for a thorough discussion yesterday, so it's understandable that your excellency has misgivings. Please speak freely today. We can discuss any difficulties you may have. He was gentle in his speech, his countenance natural and at ease. But despite Shen Zichuan's choice of words, there was clearly no room for discussion here. Beneath this placid facade was an unshakable resolve to grasp what he wanted. This final remark was all it took for Luo Mu to understand Shen Zichuan's intent. Discuss any difficulties you have. But what was the purpose of discussion? To facilitate action. Shen Zichuan left Luo Mu no opening to refuse at all. The moment he opened his mouth, he had made it clear that Luo Mu had no choice. When Luo Mu looked up again, his timidity was gone. If the vice commander can quell the bandits in Chazhou, I am willing to follow your lead. However, Cai Yu is no Lei Chongming, nor is the vice commander the Marquis with his 20,000 mighty soldiers. I'm afraid the strength of a single man may not be enough. Shen Zichuan was unruffled. Fear not. Our meeting today is as good as 1,000,000 mighty soldiers. Chapter 136. Sowing Discord. Shen Zichuan spoke with such confidence because he knew Chazhou was not a place that could be won through sheer military might. During the reign of Yongyi, Duanzhou and Duanzhou had been the richest and most prosperous prefectures in Zhongbo. Shen Wei had commanded the garrison troops of all the prefectures, yet even with money and soldiers, he still failed to eradicate the bandits of Chazhou. Before Shen Zichuan had embarked on this journey, Zhou Gui and his advisors in Suzhou had prepared a detailed report on the subject and came to the unanimous conclusion that Chazhou must be won with statecraft, not force. Cai Yu was indeed no Lei Chongming. The biggest difference between the bandits of Chazhou and the bandits of Mount Luo was that those in Chazhou were still highwaymen in the true sense of the word. Meanwhile, those on Mount Luo had banded together and established their own rule in their territory, even making plans for expansion. It was clear that Lei Jingzhe, who had hidden behind Lei Chongming for years, was no longer satisfied with being merely a bandit. He desired to cast off his old self and seek legitimacy, while Cai Yu did not. Hence, Suzhou had to fight the bandits of Mount Luo and scheme against those in Chazhou. Luo Mu was perhaps not as devoted as Zhou Gui was to serving the people, but since Shen Zichuan didn't stop Kong Ling from visiting him the day before, Luo Mu knew they must need him. He had served as the prefect of Chazhou for over 10 years. No one understood the ins and outs of the prefecture better than him. Your Excellency was assigned to Chazhou during the reign of Yongyi, Shen Zichuan observed. In that time, you've accomplished quite a list of political feats, and you appealed strongly to Shen Wei to suppress the bandits. However, Chazhou was too far from Duanzhou, and with Fanzhou standing between the two prefectures, Shen Wei found it both too troublesome and expensive for his troops to travel so far. In his mind, the odds of success were minute. He struck down Your Excellency's request. Shen Zichuan didn't so much as blink as he spoke his father's name. I noticed that since that time, Your Excellency's approach to governing began to change. Luo Mu waved a hand. What political achievements do I have to my name? The vice commander speaks too highly of me. I have achieved nothing since my arrival in Chazhou. During the reign of Yongyi, Chazhou was notorious for its bandits. Back then, when Chudu was considering which officials to dispatch to the regions outside the capital, Jiang Qingshan and I were both among those they assigned. When I first arrived here, I had a mind to accomplish great things, but it was simply too difficult. His expression gradually grew solemn. During my first 2 years, I tried to revive the garrison troops. Although Shen Wei didn't approve, he didn't stop me either. The Ministry of War thought it was feasible. They increased Chazhou's military expenses according to the recommendations I made in my memorial, and I started equipping Chazhou's garrison. I was ambitious then, wholeheartedly focused on suppressing the bandits. It was only when the real fighting began that I realized how wrong I'd been. Bandits have been a problem for Chazhou since before the reign of Yongyi. Long before the garrison troops were established, there was a group of bandits here. In its earliest days, Huzhou wasn't as prosperous as it is now, and the Yan clan hadn't yet made its fortune. The traders who came through here were mostly wealthy merchants from the 13 cities of Jueshi, and the bandits of Chazhou made their living by robbing these merchants or kidnapping them for ransom. By the time the imperial court perceived the severity of the problem, it was too late. The bandits had already put down roots in Chazhou and flourished into various gangs and factions. As a result, the population of Chazhou was rowdy and barely constrained by the rule of law. Implementing the yellow register here had proved an exceptional challenge, as almost half the people had been bandits at one point or another. Because they could not be considered decent civilian citizens, it seemed the only option was to register them as military households. When the officials of the Eastern Palace deliberated over this, they determined it would be best if these people were absorbed into the military and made part of a proper army. With military fields to tend and a monthly salary, they could maintain a decent livelihood and feed their families. There would be no more need for them to turn to highway robbery. At the same time, the officials could regulate the movement of the people, keeping them in Chazhou to farm in peace instead of allowing them to run to and fro making trouble for the empire, which would in turn strengthen the governing capabilities of Chazhou's prefect. In this, however, the officials of the Eastern Palace made a fatal mistake. They were armchair strategists, taking policies Zhongbo had used successfully in other prefectures and implementing them in Chazhou without adapting to local circumstances. The bandits of Chazhou were indeed incorporated into an official army, but the land wasn't as easy to cultivate as that in other areas. These men followed the rules for a short time before they began to simply collect their army salary while continuing to rob people. They no longer even needed to forge documents of travel and access. They could loot and plunder under the guise of catching bandits. They chased after their own shadows, going round and round in circles with the imperial court. The prefects from the capital were ill-equipped to resist the established might of these local bandits, and Luomu was no exception. It wasn't long before reality dealt the bright-eyed new prefect a ruthless lesson. Yet this was not the end of it. In later years, bandit chiefs like Cai Yu emerged in Chazhou. They spoke of the chivalry and righteousness of the martial arts world and were generous with their riches, willing to lend a hand to like-minded brothers. Over time, their fame spread, and they grew far more popular and admired than the dull and inflexible scholars sent to manage them. The prefect became nothing more than a figurehead, ruling the prefecture in name only. By this point, Shen Zichuan thought he understood why Shen Wei hadn't been willing to deploy troops. He didn't have the nerve. Shen Wei had been conferred the title of Prince of Jianxing, but it was just that, a nice-sounding title. At heart, he was just as much of an outsider as an assigned official like Luo Mu. He had neither opposed nor supported Luo Mu's proposals at the start of Luo Mu's tenure because he was adopting a wait-and-see approach. If Luo Mu's measures succeeded, then he could follow his lead. If Luo Mu failed, he could hold him accountable. He was unwilling to step to the fore and offend the bandits of Chazhou himself because he understood one thing very well. Compared to Luo Mu, Cai Yu and his ilk were the real rulers of Chazhou. But things are different now. Shen Zichuan's throat was slightly hoarse, and he coughed for a moment. Cai Yu is living off the beneficence of the Yan clan, and the money he makes is wrung from the tears and blood of the people. Established bandits like him build their wealth on the backs of suffering refugees. Plenty live well inside the city of Chazhou, but the cost is told in the commoners lying dead from starvation along the roads beyond the city walls. Over time, the common folk will come to resent those like him. Allow me to speak plainly. Luo Mu weighed his options, then continued cautiously. After the fall of Zhongbo, the supply of grain in Chazhou shrank, and what remains is pathetic. When the Grand Secretariat transferred the contents of the granaries in the various prefectures to Jueshi in the name of disaster relief, it was supposed to be a loan. But Shen Wei was dead, and Chudu never sent anyone to take his place governing Zhongbo. The 6 prefectures each governed themselves. Simply surviving was an uphill battle, and no one had the time or energy to pursue the debt owed to us by Chudu. They couldn't afford to pursue it. Recent years have seen a rise in law-abiding families turning to crime from sheer desperation. Starving and with no other options, these people have little choice but to sink to banditry. At first, Cai Yu's bandits in Chazhou provided assistance to the poor, but later, the Yan clan of Huzhou saw an opportunity to get into business of selling grain here and made use of Cai Yu's influence to push the Xi clan's business out of Zhongbo. They joined hands and all made a big fortune. Cai Yu's sitting on a mountain of gold in his old age, and he's grown increasingly fond of the sound of flattery. Gradually, he lost the chivalrous heart he once had. He tore down the porridge tents and grain shops he had set up outside the city for the needy and grew comfortable as the local emperor of Chazhou. Resentful voices filled the streets, but nothing could be done. He is no longer the man he used to be. Yet even when the mighty fell, they held more power than the common man. Cai Yu still had influence in the south of Zhongbo and in Huzhou. The fact that Yan Huzhu addressed him as Pa also carried weight. It was almost impossible for the smaller bandit factions Luo Mu had privately funded to make a mark. He could only anxiously watch as Chazhou's food supplies dwindled, helpless to act. A brief silence fell over the room. The half-open windows offered a glimpse of orange jasmine white petals adorned with drops of rain. The sky was overcast. Quite a while had passed since he had set out on this errand, and Luo Mu couldn't dawdle here much longer. Despite the open windows, Shen Zichuan found the room stuffy. The cup of tea in his hands had gone cold. When he spoke at last, it was to say something that seemed to contradict all that had come before. If Cai Yu is wise, he should understand that the so-called resentful voices filling the streets are merely underhanded tricks by the other gangs. As his brother-in-law, Your Excellency ought to give him a reminder or two in this regard. Luo Mu was taken aback. He didn't understand what Shen Zichuan meant. Shen Zichuan brushed the tea foam aside with the white jade-like lid of the cup. With Lei Jingzhi's death, Cai Yu will become the most renowned bandit chief in all of Zhongbo. This is the perfect moment while he's in high spirits. When it comes to Chazhou and the Yan clan, he won't tolerate anyone else getting a slice of his pie. What's more, the greatest fear of a man approaching his twilight years is not being the man he once was. If he thinks the wrath of the people is the underhanded work of younger up-and-comers, he won't let them get away with it. In a flash, Luo Mu understood. He couldn't help but marvel at how ruthless a move this was. Shen Zichuan wished for Cai Yu to regard public wrath as infighting between his gangs, intentionally incited by his enemies. If he believed this to be true, he would intensify his efforts to suppress the smaller bandits in order to guard his wealth. The smaller bandits were already discontented. Should Cai Yu come down hard on them now, their discontent would grow. As long as resentment festered between the two sides, it would be hard for them to join forces again. They might even turn on each other without any outside prompting. The smaller gangs Your Excellency previously funded in secret can be put to good use here. Once they've taken a beating from Cai Yu, you can give them a helping hand and a generous gift of grain. Gather them up as brothers who will bond in a time of adversity. Shen Zichuan finished his tea and motioned for Qiao Tianya to refill it. He glanced up at Luo Mu and continued, When the small come together, they will be a force to be reckoned with. It's no different from a pack of jackals hunting their prey. We shouldn't fight him head on. Simply heap fuel on the fire and fan the flames. His words gave Luo Mu chills. Merely by dropping Cai Yu a few hints, this man would incite Cai Yu to tear down the things he'd built with his own hands. Sowing discord was not an uncommon strategy, but Shen Zichuan had been in Chazhou a single night. How did he have such a clear picture of Cai Yu in Chazhou? Luo Mu couldn't help but recall Shen Zichuan's previous identity, a member of the embroidered uniform guard. Once we take Cai Yu off the board, we can discuss the trade of grain between our prefectures in detail, Shen Zichuan said calmly. In the future, Your Excellency's stoic endurance of shame and humiliation at the hands of the bandits will become an edifying anecdote in Chazhou. The full stomachs of the commoners will be Your Excellency's most distinguished political achievement. Even in the other prefectures, you'll be an official admired by all. Lord Luo, we'll meet again soon. Not long after Luo Mu left, it started raining again. Shen Zichuan rode in the carriage back to the manor where he was currently residing. When he stepped out and saw the heavy overcoat draped over Qiao Tianya's arm, he commented, "The weather is still warm for now. There's no need for this. Why did you even bring it?" Tilting the umbrella toward Shan Zichuan, Qiao Tianya said, "It wasn't my idea. Shifu specifically gave the instruction." Shan Zichuan strode through the door. He had asked Gu Qingqing, still far away in Juexi, to purchase this estate under the guise of other business. It was old, cramped, and in a state of mild disrepair. The front porch was waterlogged, and few flowers or brushes were planted in the courtyard. "Ever since I arrived in Zhongbo, I've been neglecting my physical training. I've made Shifu worry. When we return, don't tell him about my illness." Shan Zichuan glanced over his shoulder and smiled at Kong Ling as he spoke. "This journey has also been hard on Mr. Cheng Feng." Kong Ling hurriedly deflected the acknowledgement. Earlier, the orange jasmine outside the window looked so verdant after the rain. "It's very soothing on the eyes," Shan Zichuan said offhandedly. "Let's plant some in the residence when we get back." As they started up the steps, they saw Fei Shang, who had been waiting just inside, step out to greet them. Not daring to be sloppy in his work, he greeted Shan Zichuan with a smile. "Master has returned at long last." "You look like you have good news to report," Shan Zichuan remarked. "Master is wise." Fei Shang lifted the hand screen for Shan Zichuan. "Before I set off, I received some items the Marquis sent from Li Bei. Knowing their importance, I dared not stop on the journey and hurried the whole way here to deliver it." The man loved to speak in this ingratiating tone. Qiao Tianya laughed out loud. As he followed them in, he teased, "I always find it interesting when Fei the 10th comes. Quite assuming." Footnote number 5, Fei the 10th, like Xiao Chuye's nickname of Xiao'er, this moniker suggests that Fei Sheng is the 10th son in his family. R being 2. Shan Zichuan removed the wide-sleeved outer robe he wore. "Let me see." Ignoring Qiao Tianya, Fei Sheng took the items from his subordinate and presented them to Shan Zichuan. Shan Zichuan touched the leather sack. It was cold. "The Marquis sent someone to deliver it to our manor. He specifically instructed that it be kept on ice. We hadn't any ice at home, so we had to borrow from Lady Zhou. A pity the ice didn't last the journey and melted soon after we set out." Shan Zichuan was curious, but he didn't let it show before the others. He pinched the leather sack between his fingers and noticed it seemed to be filled with liquid. He opened it, but before he could peer inside, he was hit with a sour, pungent smell. Qiao Tianya was right beside him. Sniffing the air, he asked, "Isn't this cow's milk?" "That can't be," Fei Sheng said in puzzlement. "Why would the Marquis send milk all that way? It can't be kept overnight. It's spoiled." They looked at Shan Zichuan, but Shan Zichuan didn't mind the smell. The corner of his lips lifted slightly in a smile. Sensing their eyes on him, he looked askance at them and asked, "What?" Who would dare answer him? Shan Zichuan closed the leather sack and opened another box in the parcel. As expected, it held loose tea leaves. He stood for a moment and let out a soft sigh. He understood Xiao Chuye perfectly. To others, cow's milk was the same everywhere, but to Xiao Chuye, what came from Li Bei was unique and could never be replaced by anything else. He set aside his own portion, and despite knowing it wouldn't keep, he still wanted to send it to Shan Zichuan. What if it was somehow delivered on time and still drinkable? They ought to eat and drink all delicious things together. That was what Xiao Chuye had been thinking. Other people might not understand, but Shan Zichuan knew it very well. Chapter 137. Letter Reading. Shan Zichuan sat down to write the letter in the main room as Xiao Tianya and Fei Sheng took their leave. Fei Sheng was itching to smoke his pipe, but he didn't dare, even in the fresh air of the veranda. He worried he would reek of tobacco if Shan Zichuan called for him later. He lingered for a moment. When he saw Qiao Tianya had stopped as well, Fei Sheng guessed what he wanted to ask. "Something on your mind, huh?" Fei Sheng took a few steps and leaned against the railing. "First, tell me, what kind of relationship do you have with the unpolished jade?" "We've met, but we're not close," Qiao Tianya answered casually. But the more Qiao Tianya tried to make light of the matter, the more suspicious Fei Sheng grew. Yao Wenyu isn't among the ranks of court officials. He's a civilian who spends most of his year traveling. Even the Hulian Marquis finds it difficult to meet him. How did you encounter him? Too lightly, Qiao Tianya said, Fate, I suppose. I didn't expect it myself. Isn't that why I told you to ask around for me? As Fei Sheng could get no details out of him, he gave up probing and reported. Before Secretariat Elder's demise, he wanted Yao Wenyu to leave Chudu and return to Jincheng, the Yao clan's hometown. There are students of Grand Preceptor Yao there who could look after him on behalf of the Secretariat Elder, but Yao Wenyu didn't go. Qiao Tianya muttered an "oh," and stood perfectly still under the eaves, watching the rain fall. Yao Wenyu probably realized the Secretariat Elder asked him to leave because he'd already made up his mind to die. Fei Sheng continued. He got in the carriage and circled around town before returning to the manor to wait for Secretariat Elder Hai to return from court. Instead, he got the news of Secretariat Elder Hai's death. Droplets of rain dampened the toes of Qiao Tianya's boots as he watched the mist rise in the courtyard. His gaze dropped to a puddle, and he regarded his own reflection. Fei Sheng paused for a moment, only continuing when Qiao Tianya's expression stayed firmly unreadable. During Secretariat Elder Hai's funeral, tens of thousands of people came to pay their respects. Yao Wenyu was his only official student, and he conducted the funeral for the Secretariat Elder as a son would for his own father. A few days later, when the students from the Imperial College rioted, all of Yao Wenyu's books were torn up. If not for Kong Qiu hiding him in time, he may very well have ended up ripped to shreds by the students himself. But ever since the revelation of the Emperor's daughter, he seems to have vanished into thin air. My informers in Chudu could find no trace of him. Qiao Tianya looked up at him. Vanished? Just so. Fei Sheng lifted a hand from the banister and drew a circle in the air. When I escaped Chudu with you, I lost contact with my informants. I only re-established correspondence a short while ago. By then, Yao Wenyu had already disappeared. The embroidered uniform guard knows Chudu like the back of their hand. If my men say he disappeared, he's more likely dead. Impossible. Qiao Tianya refuted it immediately. If Kong Qiu still hopes to revive the moderates, Yao Wenyu is a key figure. Whether for official or personal reasons, Kong Qiu would never let him die. Fei Sheng watched Qiao Tianya, waiting for him to finish. Then he said, It's not just a wild guess. Hear me out. Initially, he was merely missing. Kong Qiu and Sun Yu both looked for him, to no avail. He was last seen on Mount Bodi, where Hai Liangyi was buried. When my men went up to investigate, they found an abandoned carriage and assumed he'd been kidnapped. But if it was an ordinary kidnapping, the perpetrators would approach Kong Qiu to negotiate a ransom. Or, at the very least, name the conditions for Yao Wenyu's release. That's the only way he could be useful as a hostage. But Kong Qiu heard nothing at all. Not even the Yao clan in Jincheng received any news of him. Qiao Tianya frowned. If the Imperial College hadn't rioted, Yao Wenyu would have almost certainly become the new star of the moderates. But the Yao clan's name was dragged through the mud during the student riots. He no longer has the credibility to lead all the students in the land. He ought to have been a useless pawn in the eyes of Chudu. If he's dead, someone must have had a reason to kill him. But I can't see any need. Fei Sheng turned to face him. Exactly. He holds no official position or title, but he's still the sole lawful grandson of the Yao clan. Killing him would be more trouble than it's worth. I don't understand it myself. At that moment, Shen Zichuan called out to them. Qiao Tianya lifted the hanging screen and disappeared inside. He did not broach the subject again. Cautious as he was, Luo Mu didn't bring anything up to Cai Yu directly. Instead, he humored his concubine and allowed her to accompany him to a study. His private correspondence, half-heartedly hidden, was almost instantly copied down by concubine Cai's maidservant and surreptitiously delivered into Cai Yu's hands. Upon seeing those letters, Cai Yu flew into a rage. He summoned Luo Mu to his residence and castigated him until he was blue in the face. I thought you were an honest man. That's why I was willing to marry my sister to you. Have I ever failed to bail you out when you were in a tight spot? I treated you like a brother, yet you were scheming behind my back. Luo Mengzheng, look at yourself. If it weren't for me, you'd never have gotten anywhere. You think you're some big shot? Cai Yu was crude and uneducated, used to mixing with the lowest stratum of society. His curses brought Luo Mu to his knees before the table as he apologized. You treat me so well, brother. How could I repay your kindness with enmity? These private letters all came to me anonymously. I have no idea who sent them. I've been so nervous and afraid, tossing and turning at night and spending my days in a stupor, trying to find an opportunity to bring this up with you, brother. Enraged, Cai Yu tossed the letters onto the desk and pointed at Luo Mu. What opportunity was there to find? You and I are just a courtyard apart. Have you been crippled? Is that why you can't walk over here? If I hadn't found out about this now, you would be in bed with them tomorrow. Cai Yu was so furious it was giving him heartburn. He stood up and took a few steps, smoothing his hand over his chest before continuing. You're a real piece of shit, Luo Mengzheng. And here I was wondering why there were so many people cursing me all of a sudden. Turns out you were all stabbing me in the back. Shameless, filthy trash. Back when I made my name, you were drinking milk from your mother's tit. How much money have I since supporting you? Yet you turn around and bite the hand that feeds you? Why? Got greedy after seeing how much we're making from the grain business? Bah! You think any of you are worth a lot in this business? You think you can handle it? Luo Mu was seized with terror. He moved to speak, but Cai Yu bellowed. Stay on your knees. I show you due respect outside these walls, and do what I can to prop you up. Yet you take it for granted and fraternize with these ingrates the moment I turn my back. I'm telling you, if not for my sister's love for you, you wouldn't walk out this door alive today. Sweat was pouring from Luo Mu like rain. He kept his head lowered and said nothing. Cai Yu stood, sneering down at Luo Mu's sweat-soaked back. He had spent his younger years making a living on a knife's edge, and now that he was old, he'd finally settled down. There wasn't a single person who didn't respectfully address him as Elder Cai when he showed his face. All major and minor bandits of Zhongbo accorded him respect. Not even Lei Chongming, whom he had despised to the core, had dared to put a toe out of line with him. Only after Luo Mu knelt for some time did Cai Yu's anger begin to fade. In his eyes, Luo Mu was a spineless man. If he had dared to keep those letters squirreled away for so long without doing anything, it was surely because he had been instigated to join this folly by the other party. Whoever it was, they were devious, trying to work their plot through the people closest to him. At this thought, Cai Yu's heart, which had been fluttering with trepidation, burned with hateful anger. He had always seen himself as a generous man. Though it was true he'd taken a large cut of the profits from the grain trade, he always set something aside for those under him so they wouldn't starve. These people didn't know the meaning of gratitude. Since they treat me with such heartlessness, I have no choice but to reciprocate in kind. Cai Yu sat beside the window where the light seeped through. He said ominously, Those insatiable, greedy upstarts are garter snakes trying to devour an elephant. I'll catch a few and make an example of them as a warning. I may be old, but I am not so decrepit that I'll sit back and let these bastards take advantage. While Cai Yu was making a public show of dealing with the minor gangs, Shen Zichuan's cold was gradually improving. Fei Sheng had been efficient in his record-keeping. Not only had he documented all the prices of goods in Chazhou, he sent someone to Fanzhou to do the same. Shen Zichuan didn't spread the news that Suzhou was getting into the grain trade. Within the first few days of their residence in the city, he simply sent Kong Ling around Chazhou to buy up imported goods, as though they had made the trip merely to conduct a bit of trade. Whenever someone came by to inquire about the purpose of their visit, Kong Ling's reply was equivocating. After a few days of his dull responses, far fewer people came to pry. Kong Ling followed Shen Zichuan to the shops in Chazhou owned by the Xi clan, which mainly dealt with rouge, medicinal herbs, and foreign goods smuggled from abroad. Starving refugees swarm outside the gates. While the city remains peaceful and prosperous, in good times and troubled ones, the ones who suffer will always be the common people. Kongling picked up a handful of medicinal herbs, took a sniff, and said approvingly, "Huh, this is quality stuff." Shi Hongxuan had a businessman's instincts. Sun Zichuan glanced around the shop. Most people wouldn't dare open a shop like this here for fear of robbery or bankruptcy. Within the last few years, the people of Zhongbo could scarcely afford a bowl of rice porridge. Who would have thought the powerful men in this city would spend more extravagantly than the merchants of Jueshi? A shop like this is just what they need. "Money makes the mare go," Kongling lamented. In speaking of Shi Hongxuan's businesses, Sun Zichuan was divulging information about his own finances. Kongling understood that this was a mark of Sun Zichuan's trust, acknowledgement for his support in Suzhou. Kongling felt his chest tighten. He had been far too impulsive that day. Modesty was a virtue. Flaunting his intelligence before a brilliant master had not been a wise move. Kongling carefully did not reply, so Sun Zichuan dropped the subject. He looked through the account books for a while and asked the shopkeeper for news from Jueshi. When the shopkeepers presented him with some trinkets as a tribute of respect, Sun Zichuan rejected items like jadeware, accepting only a fan that caught his eye. He had gotten accustomed to the fan Xiao Chuye had gifted him before it was stained, and this new one didn't feel quite right in his hand. For now, he would make do, but he was counting on Xiao Chuye to not forget his promise when he returned. As the rain finally ceased in Chazhou, it had just begun to fall in Libei. The weather in Zhongbo was still warm at the tail end of summer, but in Libei, the air was starting to cool. The winds picked up in the 7th month, and once the rainy season ended, the days would get colder. Xiao Chuye had been in a foul mood since receiving Xiao Fangshu's letter. He had remained at Third Sand Camp, but had expanded the range of his patrols to overlap with the ones from Border Camp, keeping watch over both camps and guarding all fronts. Wu Ziyu had initially planned to go north 3 days hence to deliver the battle steeds, but had delayed his departure indefinitely. He couldn't set out on his own. He had to follow Xiao Chuye's orders. Xiao Fangshu's letter had officially made Xiao Chuye the commanding general overseeing equipment and supplies. Xiao Chuye had no say in where he went and had to heed the orders of the other generals who required resupply all over Libei. Xiao Chuye stepped down from the fortress walls and walked to his tent through the rain. The sky was beginning to darken, and the mess cook was scraping a pot as he hollered out the call for mealtime. The Libei armored cavalry and the Imperial Army ate apart, squatting with their backs to each other, as if separated by an invisible wall. In the case of the Libei armored cavalry, they'd tasted one defeat after another and couldn't get over the humiliation of their repeated losses. Meanwhile, the Imperial Army had never been a model of decorum. Everyone was used to cracking jokes and horsing around. They had few rules to follow once they'd stripped off their armor, and were a playful bunch who loved their fun, something the Libei armored cavalry looked down upon. Xiao Chuye accepted a handkerchief from Chun Yang and wiped sweat from his face. The flaps of his tent were wide open, and the hanging screens were raised to try to catch a breeze. Before Xiao Chuye could take a seat, Gu Jin stepped inside with a bundle in his arms. "Master, a letter from Gongzi." He took it and waved a hand, gesturing for them to leave. Xiao Chuye brewed himself tea and drank a cup as he unwrapped the bundle, revealing a neatly folded stack of clothes and a bulging oilskin bag. He paid no attention to the clothing. He opened the bag. Inside were only 2 items: a handful of orange jasmine, its flowers withered and flattened by the journey, and a letter, slightly damp after being wrapped for so long. When Xiao Chuye picked it up, he could still smell the scent of the jasmine on it. He finished the tea in one gulp, then unfolded the paper. The letter was short. Xiao Chuye had finished reading it by the time he swallowed his tea. He turned his head toward the entrance of the tent, where Chun Yang and Gu Jin still stood, and said calmly, "Lower the hanging screens. I'm cold." Gu Jin wanted to ask, "Weren't you sweating just a moment ago?" But Chun Yang had already removed the hooks and let the screens down. The moment he was shielded from view, Xiao Chuye read the letter again, and then again. Finally, he rubbed at his ear, picked up the stack of clothing, and collapsed heavily onto his cot. He held up the letter, letting his eyes linger on each word. It's been too many days since we parted. I know you must miss me, so I've sent a small token to offer you comfort. Touch it as if you touched me. Xiao Chuye stared at that line of text and read it once more. Touch it as if you touched me. His throat felt dry, but laughter bubbled up inexplicably, and his gaze grew fierce. Scrawled at the very bottom, in a light and hasty hand, were the words, "A cold pillow makes for difficult nights. When will you return to our bed? A good night's sleep is only possible with me in your arms." Xiao Chuye let the letter fall from his fingers and gazed up at the ceiling. A moment later, he rolled over and buried his face in the pillow. It was as if Shan Zichuan was lying beside him, nibbling at his ear and whispering languidly, "A good night's sleep is only possible with me in your arms." Chapter 138. Strategist. Shan Zichuan woke with the sun. After breakfast, he took the carriage down to the cosmetic shop with Kong Ling. Business continued as usual in the front hall, while in the back courtyard, Qiao Tianya and Fei Sheng stood guard, and the embroidered uniform guard kept careful watch both inside and outside the premises. Half an hour later, Luo Mu Sedan arrived. He was dressed casually in a brick-red robe with wide sleeves and a slanted collar. The shopkeeper at the front desk was a sharp man. Noting that the servant behind Luo Mu was unfamiliar, he raised his voice. "It's already hot out. We can't let our guests stand outside in the sun. Men, show these fellows inside for some tea." The servants exchanged a glance. Luo Mu couldn't run from them here. They followed the shop assistant into another room and took a seat. Still, they insisted on raising the curtains to keep an eye on the entrance. The shopkeeper walked beside Luo Mu and offered a handkerchief. Luo Mu wiped his hands as usual and strolled around the shop, looking at the goods on the shelves. The shopkeeper smiled. "The last time Your Excellency came by, we didn't have everything in stock. We prepared in advance this time. Some new jade pieces and trinkets had just arrived from the east as well. They're all in the back. This way, please." Luo Mu cast a hesitant glance at his servants. "It's just across the courtyard. It won't take up too much of Your Excellency's time," the shopkeeper urged. "These are rare goods. You'll be much more comfortable taking your time browsing in the back." Luo Mu reluctantly nodded and followed the shopkeeper to the courtyard at the back of the shop. Qiao Tianya drew the curtain aside for Luo Mu, who murmured his thanks and lowered his head to enter. He first bowed to Shan Zichuan, then looked toward Kong Ling. Only upon seeing that both their expressions were relaxed did he take a seat. Noting that Luo Mu was dressed as a diligent scholar today, Shan Zichuan presumed he had chosen his clothes and shoes for this errand with care. Although he sat ramrod straight, he couldn't keep from glancing subconsciously at Kong Ling from time to time as they spoke, and the moment Kong Ling opened his mouth, Luo Mu's eyes fixed attentively upon him. "Cai Yu has focused his attention on squashing the smaller gangs in the last few days," Luo Mu explained, "but he knows where to draw the line. He understands the principles of interdependence. These bandits share a common lot. If one falls, the others will follow. He fears he will end up isolated if he goes too far. At the same time as he's striking at the smaller gangs he thinks are opposing him, he's trying to win over the remaining up-and-comers by offering them cheap grain." Remembering that Shan Zichuan was there, Luo Mu exercised restraint and glanced away from Kong Ling. "He plans to give those gangs who haven't stirred up trouble the opportunity to sell grain at a discount and make a quick return." "What is he offering them?" Kong Ling asked. "1 tael of silver for 5 dough of rice," Luo Mu answered. Kong Ling smiled. "That's hardly a low price. His so-called discount merely means he makes a tiny bit less profit than others out there. Cai Yu used to be generous about helping the needy, considering himself above money and worldly possessions. He's gotten miserly in his old age. At this price, the grain could hardly be called cheap. Indeed, it was still exorbitantly expensive. Chazhou's going rate for rice was 1 tael of silver for 2 dough of rice, while in Chengdu, 1 tael of silver purchased 20 times as much. Cai Yu was making money hand over fist while driving the common folk to starvation. Even to win over his adversaries, he had only lowered the price this tiny bit. The man was genuinely obsessed with wealth. He couldn't bear to undercut his own profits. Shen Zichuan skimmed the foam in his tea. Cai Yu is in a fix too. He can't back down. Everyone inside and outside the city is complaining about the high price of grain. If he lowers the price drastically for the sake of some minor bandits, the common folk will hate him even more than they do now. He doesn't dare. It's not just Chazhou. Public wrath is growing even in Fanzhou. Luo Mu was well acquainted with Cai Yu's business dealings. At the beginning of this year, the Yan clan severed their connection with Lei Chongming, and Han Heru stopped sponsoring the bandits from Mount Luo, though no one knows why. This is one of the reasons Lei Chongming set his sights on Suzhou and its granary. They couldn't afford to buy Cai Yu's grains. Let Cai Yu sell for a few days. Shen Zichuan turned over his folding fan and tapped it lightly against the table. It doesn't matter if it's 1 tael for 2 dough or 1 tael for 5 dough. Neither the common folk nor the minor bandits can afford it. Cai Yu is gritting his teeth to show such kindness because he's hoping these bandits will knuckle under. But he's too arrogant by far. It's bound to backfire. It's not just the common folk, Kong Ling lamented. Even government officials can afford to buy grain at these prices on a monthly salary issued by the imperial court. On our way here, we saw people selling themselves like cattle outside Chazhou. Parents are selling all their children just for a chance at survival. People aren't worth much nowadays. Even if they sell their children, no one's paying more than a handful of coppers. Luo Mu had long heard of this practice. Look at the situation we're in. Who in Zhongbo will pay just to have another mouth to feed? Only the brothels in Fanzhou are willing to take them. And even there, a child from a good family sold into the bottom class wouldn't even be worth a dough of rice. Shen Zichuan was unfamiliar with the situation in Fanzhou. If Fanzhou can't even feed its own people, where is it getting money to operate brothels? They're run by bandits too. These specifically deal in the flesh trade and work with the bandits from Mount Luo and Dengzhou. Luo Mu answered. Prostitutes are dirt cheap, and whatever tiny bit they make is swallowed by the madams. But they have to feed the people they buy, right? Kong Ling asked, perplexed. Do they buy grain from Cai Yu too? Luo Mu shook his head. Humans are worth less than dogs in Fanzhou. They're fed swill and weeds. If a few starve to death, the bandits can buy more. The cost is negligible. They won't suffer a loss either. Kong Ling sat in a daze, a look of anguish coming over his face. To think Zhongbo has been reduced to this. If the imperial court had taken action earlier, how could the situation have deteriorated so utterly? I said many years back that Hua Siqian and... Shun Wei's name lodged in his throat. Knowing Kong Ling, Luo Mu feared he would say something to upset Shen Zichuan. He quickly changed the subject. In the vice commander's opinion, what should we do next? In lieu of answering, Shen Zichuan said, if Shen Wei hadn't fled before the enemy, Zhongbo wouldn't have suffered such a devastating loss. I hold Mr. Cheng Feng in the highest esteem for his concern for the common people. There's no need to shy away from this subject. Shen Zichuan spoke with such sincerity that Luo Mu was embarrassed instead. Kong Ling felt his heart sink. Recently, he had been doing his best to avoid Shen Zichuan despite their proximity on this mission. Kong Ling was a clever man. He was willing to work for Zhou Gui because he understood Zhou Gui's character. But he still felt wary around Shen Zichuan. Following Shen Zichuan, he thought, was ultimately a dangerous move. Masters who were difficult to read were the hardest to serve. The calmer the vice commander appeared on the surface, the more cautiously Kong Ling had to tread, lest one misstep land him in a bottomless abyss. Kong Ling didn't mind working with Shen Zichuan, but was unwilling to devote himself to him the way he had Zhou Gui. Shen Zichuan had been dropping hints the entire trip, yet Kong Ling had feigned ignorance at every turn. Now, seeing that Shen Zichuan was not only unoffended, but had even excused his awkward slip of the tongue, he was filled with increasing trepidation. Noting the shift in Kong Ling's expression, Shan Zichuan gently turned over his fan and paused for a moment before speaking. Keep the fact that Suzhou is here to sell grain quiet for a few more days. Wait until the bandits are fed up with Cai Yu pushing them around and decide to prioritize their own interests. Only then will we release the news. At that point, don't bring our grain wagons into the city. We'll set up porridge tents right outside of the walls and tell the refugees Suzhou is here to sell grain at a fair price. What if they have no money? Luomu probed tentatively. Shan Zichuan smiled. Are these people not Chazhou's future garrison troops and the cultivators of your farmlands? The common people may be poor, but your excellency has amassed quite a sum yourself with Cai Yu's help. What's more, once Cai Yu is out of the picture, a large part of his assets will fall into your excellency's hands. Use that silver to do business with Suzhou in exchange for winning the hearts of the people, and many of your excellency's future problems will be solved. That said, I must remind you that Suzhou is here to do business, not to tighten its own belt to offer charity to others. Beads of sweat sprang up on Luomu's forehead. He dabbed his brow with a handkerchief and nodded. But of course. Shan Zichuan returned to his manor in Chazhou without Kong Ling. Qiao Tianya sat in the driver's seat with his hands clasped behind his head, tilting the brim of his bamboo hat forward. From the other side of the curtain, he asked, Master, you don't want him anymore? Wilting in the heat, Shan Zichuan closed his eyes to rest within the stuffy interior of the carriage. He listened to the peddlers hawking their wares along the street for a moment before answering. I've tried both carrot and stick, but he's determined to turn me down. Speaking around the fresh stalk of grass sticking out his mouth, Qiao Tianyao said, That's to be expected. He's hidden his abilities from you on more than one occasion because he's afraid of being coerced. After completing his education, he didn't follow in Zhou Gui and Luomu's footsteps and joined the ranks of the civil officials. He wants to be a civilian. Men like him are natural-born strategists. His point of pride is his ability to choose his own path. Shan Zichuan opened his eyes a crack. It's not as if he's my only option. It wasn't that he wished to force Kong Ling into serving him, but the fact was, Shan Zichuan genuinely lacked manpower. At first, he had thought Kong Ling and Zhou Gui were the best arrangement. Put together, the pair of them could ensure the peace and stability of Suzhou at the very least, and perhaps the whole region. But now, Shan Zichuan needed someone at his side who could advise and plan. He no longer lacked a pair of eyes or a pair of hands, but a strategist who could assist him in devising long-term tactics. Kong Ling had a reputation in Zhongbo as a man of considerable talent, and he had been fellow students with both Zhou Gui and Luomu. Based on these relationships alone, he could assist Shan Zichuan with many issues in both prefectures. For instance, he had been able to see Luomu directly upon arriving in Chazhou by simply delivering a visitation card. He also possessed the social connections he had built up among the Duanzhou garrison troops from his first time as Tan Tai Long's advisor. As long as those connections remained alive, they could be of use in the future. Shan Zichuan hadn't initially thought highly of Kong Ling. When Lei Jingzhe had tried to hoodwink him, Kong Ling had been too easily deceived. Kong Ling's shout outside Suzhou's city walls was what made Shan Zichuan take note of him again. But it was not until Kong Ling had so swiftly agreed to Shan Zichuan's proposal before they set off for Chazhou that Shan Zichuan had fully set his mind on taking Kong Ling into his employ. However, it seemed Kong Ling had no intention of changing masters. For one thing, Shan Zichuan was too young. Not only was he burdened with a difficult past, growing up under stigma and hardship, he had also studied under Qi Huilian. Qi Huilian had seen many ups and downs in Chengdu and had served as the head of the Eastern Palace for many years. What kind of student would such a teacher procure? Qi Huilian was meant to raise an emperor, a point Kong Ling didn't dare dwell upon. Most importantly, Kong Ling feared Shan Zichuan. He couldn't bring himself to trust him. In the eyes of Kong Ling, Shan Zichuan knew he was a cold-hearted man who would cast aside personal relationships in a heartbeat. Had Zhou Gui been the negotiator here today, he would never have spoken such pointed words to Luo Mu. Vexed, Shen Zichuan raised his head to watch the curtain of the carriage sway amid the jolts and bumps of the road. Sunlight flickered through the gaps, spilling onto his knees and melting into the white of his robe. Since the day of Qi Huilian's death, Shen Zichuan had worn only white in mourning. He had never asked Qiao Qianya what Han Cheng did with his teacher's body after he left Chudu. His anguished wails that night were known only to Xiao Chuye, but the names of Xue Xiu Zhuo, Han Cheng, and the Empress Dowager were seared into Shen Zichuan's heart, along with his last sight of the city walls of Chudu, stained red in the pouring rain. He had to stand firm. He needed a strategist. A voice inside him murmured, "A strategist who can stand up to Xue Xiu Zhuo as his equal." Chapter 139. The Price of Grain. Knowing he had disappointed Shen Zichuan with his rebuff, Kong Ling avoided him over the next few days. Instead, he focused his attention on inspecting the goods in the Xi clan shops, too busy even to pause for a midday meal. Shen Zichuan behaved as he always had and continued to greet him as Mr. Cheng Feng whenever they crossed paths. Yet far from putting Kong Ling at ease, this only increased his apprehension, and he deferred to Shen Zichuan in every particular. Just as they had predicted, Cai Yu's discounted grain did not impress the minor bandits. With Luo Mu playing the middleman and pulling strings, several different parties gradually converged, united in their discontent toward Cai Yu. In recent years, Cai Yu's tastes had run toward extravagance. When he celebrated his birthday, he always received rare and valuable gifts, and the value of these gifts directly impacted how he treated the giver over the next year. This had stirred up a great deal of unhappiness among many in private. At the same time, news that Cai Yu was selling grain for cheap swiftly spread outside the city walls. The rumored price dropped lower and lower with each telling, and the starving commoners outside the city grew more and more outraged. Cai Yu had once considered himself a respected elder of Chazhou, yet now he barred the city gates and ignored the plight of the people. Shen Zichuan was right. It wasn't that he didn't understand the corner he was in, but that he had no way to back down. The grain in Chazhou was presently supplied by Huzhou, and thus bankrolled by the Yan clan. For their part in this, the Yan clan expected a certain monetary return. If it didn't come out of the profits from selling the grain, it would have to come from Cai Yu's own pockets. By lowering the price, he would only disadvantage himself. And as he was unwilling to stomach such a loss, he could only push ahead. In the meantime, he had sent several private letters to Huzhou to sound them out. This was the moment Shen Zichuan had been waiting for. Cai Yu could never have imagined that overnight all of Chazhou would be talking about the price of grain. "Where do all these people come from?" Cai Yu summoned his maidservant to help him dress as he snapped at his trusted aide. "Why didn't I hear so much as a whisper about Suzhou's grain wagons entering our territory?" "They took the public road disguised as merchants and kept the news of their arrival quiet. Word never reached us," his aide replied. Cai Yu glowered as he pulled on his boots and stepped forward. "I thought it was strange when Kong Ling entered the city. What business could Suzhou possibly have here? Turns out they've come to steal ours. They prepared all this just to challenge me. What are they saying?" The aide picked up the back hem of Cai Yu's robe. "I sent someone to make inquiries this morning. The price Suzhou's merchants are offering outside the city is 1 tael for 7 dou of rice." On hearing this, Cai Yu sneered. "I thought they were here to play bodhisattva and save the people, but they're here to profit off their misfortune, same as anyone. Has there been any reply from Huzhou?" The aide calculated the days and answered, "The letter won't have made it there yet." Cai Yu stood by the door and contemplated in silence. Outside in the courtyard, the stream gurgled and the caged birds hanging under the covered walkway chirped, clear and melodious. He had spent a vast sum of money on this estate, intending to pass it down to his children. He had several sons waiting to take over the family business from their old man, and more than 1,000 people in his family and under his employment who depended on his sale of grain. He couldn't afford to lose this business. 1 tael for 7 dough, Cai Yu muttered. 1 tael for 7 dough. Trying to steal my business with prices like that? Isn't Suzhou looking down on me a bit much? Since they've lowered their price, we'll go even lower. Oh, God. Oh, God, sir. Oh, why does this sound familiar? Where have I heard this? Okay. Go tell our shops I'm reducing the price to 1 tael for 8 dough of rice, flour, or beans out of sympathy for the commoners inside and outside the city. The aide hesitated. Young Master Yan is yet to reply. Lower it. Cai Yu's expression was grave. The young master still calls me Pa. If we can't make up what we owe them, I'll thicken my skin and go to Huzhou to beg a favor. With the young master at the head of the Yan clan, no one will dare give me attitude. Suzhou thinks they can come here and menace us in our own city. If we don't make them think twice, then there will be trouble in the future. The instant Cai Yu's aide stepped out of the manor, Shen Zichuan knew everything that'd been said. Fei Sheng's network was everywhere. When he whispered the contents of Cai Yu's conversation to Shen Zichuan was handing out porridge outside the city. The weather was bright and clear. Shen Zichuan had left the city at daybreak and given out free porridge to the poor and needy from early morning until late afternoon, standing the whole time. The sun was beating down, so hot the muddy ground dried and cracked. As the sun climbed in the sky, all the refugees sought shelter under the trees. Shen Zichuan nodded slightly after hearing Fei Sheng out, wiping his hands with a handkerchief. He's taken the bait. He won't escape now. Go to Luomu. Tell him to make sure the smaller gangs hold their ground. We can push Cai Yu's price down even further. Fei Sheng knew precisely what Shen Zichuan intended, but he had to play the fool before him. He inquired like a keen student, Master, are we going to reduce our prices too? We can't let Cai Yu get his way. Shen Zichuan tossed the handkerchief to Qiao Tianya. Naturally. We'll wait for nightfall before we lower our price. After all, he had other matters to attend to during the day. A white-robed young master with a white jade earring and only a handful of attendants had suddenly appeared outside the city of Chaozhou. He stayed at the porridge booth from morning to evening, personally distributing porridge to the people. Word traveled easily among the refugees, who came to get their bowls. They learned that this rice from Cizhou was initially meant to be sold in Chaozhou, but Cai Yu refused to let the merchants into the city. The party had found the hungry commoners outside the city too pitiable and decided to hand out their wares to them instead. Shen Zichuan's attitude was polite and amiable, and he spoke with humble courtesy. Best of all, he was handsome. If any households came to the porridge booth with orphans and widows, or with the infirm, he not only gave them food, but even sent a physician to examine them, bearing the consultation fees and cost of the medicine himself. Within 2 hours of the booth's opening, word had spread, and the refugees who had come after hearing of him had converged into a flock. Whenever someone asked the young master's name, Qiao Tianya and Fei Sheng would answer with, Lord Zhou's advisor, or Mr. Cheng Feng's colleague. Even so, Shen Zichuan's youth and distinguished air sent speculation swirling through the city. None of the common folk knew who this mysterious gentleman was, which made him all the more fascinating. Cai Yu was restless with anxiety as he waited at home until the wee hours of the morning, not daring to close his eyes for even a moment. When he heard footsteps outside, he sprang up to let in his trusted aide, asking almost before he'd stepped through the door, How is it? Is there an update on Kong Ling's end? The aide had been running to and fro all day. Though he had taken a sedan, he was ready to collapse from exhaustion, and his back was drenched in sweat. He wiped his brow with his sleeves and gasped for breath as he answered, Yes, they went down. As my lord predicted, Cizhou also lowered their price. How much? Cai Yu asked anxiously. 1 tael for 9 dough of rice, the aide replied. Cai Yu was calm. This was within his expectations. He paced as he thought aloud. We offered 1 additional dough per tael, and they followed suit. They're following our lead. They're not confident in their pricing either. The aide trailed behind Cai Yu. My lord, then should we keep lowering the price? If we go any lower, it's going to reach 10 dough, 1 dan, per tael. From 2 dough to 10. Cai Yu was already dreading the consequences he would face in Hezhou after this disaster. But he was in too deep. He could only trudge on. He clenched his jaw. Lower. 1 dan per tael. Really quick Mari note. When Shen Zichuan and Kong Ling have it lowered to 1 tael for 9 dough of rice, just so you all know, 9 dough of rice is going to be 90 liters of rice. And so with Cai Yu lowering it again, being 1 tael for 10 dough of rice, that is going to be 100 liters, so just 10 more. When the news reached Luo Mu in his residence, he turned to Kong Ling. If Cai Yu continues to lower the price, it'll be difficult for him to raise it again later. He's fallen for your ploy. Hook, line, and sinker. Kong Ling peered out the window and confirmed there was no one else around before speaking. It's all thanks to the vice commander's foresight. Luo Mu sighed. Had I been his target, I would have been deceived too. How could Cai Yu know Suzhou's been aiming for Tudu's price this whole time? This is a lucrative business. Every increase of 1 dough of grain per tael is a loss of real silver. Riches can be taken to the grave. How much longer can he profit off the misfortunes of Zhongbo? Don't be blinded by money. If Cai Yu had any sense, he would have shown some restraint this year. 6 years ago, Suzhou hadn't a leg to stand on, but we've been rebuilding our strength these last few years. The decision to source grain from Li Bei's armored cavalry from Suzhou last year was made by Secretariat Elder Hai and Marquis Xiao. Think, back then, Tudu already knew Suzhou could bear this burden. Once Suzhou is revitalized, those with ambition from other prefectures will bear witness to our success and be inspired to action. When the time comes for these places to recultivate their fields, the price of grain in Zhongbo is sure to fall. This golden goose could never last forever. The only question was, who would be the one to strangle it? Kong Ling paused. Both the time and place are right. The vice commander means to make a killing here in Zhongbo. Seeing that Kong Ling was somewhat distracted, Luo Mu ventured. I can see the vice commander has intentions of taking you on, yet you willfully turned a blind eye to it. Chengfeng, could it be that even the vice commander cannot compare to Zhou Gui? Gazing at the shadows of the trees beyond the window, Kong Ling thought for a long time before replying. My abilities are mediocre. I can advise Zhou Gui because the prefect of Suzhou is all he wishes to be in this lifetime. Keeping the peace in one small corner of the world is easy. Even someone of my caliber can do it. But stabilizing our great land 1,000 miles across requires the talent of a pillar of the state. Fish may be confined to ponds, but dragons look toward the sky. The vice commander is no mere fish. I dare not be presumptuous as to claim a connection with such a man. Luo Mu was struck dumb. Inside or outside Chazhou, no one slept well that night. Cai Yu drank cup after cup of strong tea, afraid to shut his eyes lest the other side surreptitiously lower the price again the moment he lay down. He had never been a man of great business acumen and had relied on his status as a bandit to serve as the face of the Yan clan in Chazhou. Now he was a bundle of nerves, driven to a state of constant anxiety. Hours went by without news from the people of Suzhou. Dawn came and went, and the porridge booth outside the city was still operating. Cai Yu heard more than 1,000 people had gathered outside the city. Still, he was confident that what he had in his hands was real fighting power, while those milling outside the walls were a motley crew. Even if they banded together, they wouldn't present much of a threat. When noon came with no news, Cai Yu decided to take a nap and lay down without changing his clothes. Yet, he had just shut his eyes when he heard the aide coming in. He bolted up and let a maidservant support him by the arm on his way out. The moment he saw the aide's expression, his heart sank. "How much did they lower it?" "My lord, this time it's madness," the aide reported, wringing his hands. "They've dropped it to 1 dan and 3 do of grain per tael of silver. The people who were still on the fence yesterday are making their way out of the city now. They were all heading for Tuzhou's wagon to buy grain." Mari note, 1 dan and 3 do of grain per tael of silver is 130 liters of grain. Cai Yu felt a chill crawl up his spine. "That low?" "It's already nearing the price of grain in Jueshi," the aide replied. "If it goes any lower, we'll have to forfeit all our profits so far this year just to repay Hezhou." Cai Yu gripped the man and blurted in disbelief. "Didn't Suzhou just send provisions to Libei? Now that Libei's rebelled, they'll expect to get all their provisions from Suzhou in the future. If Zhou Gui sells all his grain, how does he plan to answer to the Prince of Libei? Can they even make any money at these prices?" The aide followed at Cai Yu's heels in a matching state of panic. "Exactly. If they keep lowering the price, it will be no different from selling in Jueshi. Wouldn't they be taking a loss? What profit is there for them?" Cai Yu was getting on in years, and he'd gone all night without sleep. He was so unsteady on his feet that he called a servant to help him to the chair. "They're determined to steal our business." Resentment roiled in him. "How dare they? Gather my men. Tonight we'll overturn their grain wagons, capture Kongling, and slaughter everyone he brought with him. I have ferocious bandits on my side. What do I have to fear from them? That arrogant brat, Zhou Gui, he thinks he has the guts to fight me head on?" The aide slapped his knee. "You're absolutely right, my lord. We should have taken the gloves off long ago instead of playing nice with these people. I'll go right away." Chapter 140. City Outskirts. Cai Yu gathered his men with great fanfare inside the city, while outside the walls, the streams of refugees had merged into a sea of people. It took but a single night for the news that someone had set up a camp and was giving out porridge to spread over a 3-mile radius. Refugees with sallow faces and ribs pushing from their chests came in droves, packing themselves around Suzhou's porridge tent so tightly not even a drop of water could have trickled through. Qiao Tianya watched as the people came swarming toward them. When they no longer had enough hands to oversee the queue of people coming to receive porridge, he shot Fei Sheng a look. Fei Sheng backed away and led the men from the embroidered uniform guard to watch the grain wagon, relieving the guards from Suzhou to help with the queue. The embroidered uniform guard were all dressed in black and carried blades at their sides, and their formidable appearance suppressed some of the restlessness of the crowd. "Master," Qiao Tianya raised a hand to hold back the people pressing in and whispered to Shen Zichuan, "It's getting dark. We've been here for 2 days and a night. Surely that's enough. You can step back now." Shen Zichuan had just finished chatting with an elderly man who'd come with the refugees. He didn't look back at Qiao Tianya's words, but tucked away the blue handkerchief he had taken out. "There's no harm in staying a little longer." Qiao Tianya surveyed their surroundings and watched the crowd jostling one another. These were all desperate refugees. He worried a fight would break out and that someone would make a grab for the grain and hurt Shen Zichuan amid the chaos. "Master, stand back next to the wagon at least. Here or there. It's all the same." Shen Zichuan looked out into the forest beyond the city, bathed in the rosy glow of clouds like shreds of red cotton flowers. The sun was already sinking below the horizon. It wouldn't be long before the sky turned dark. He had been outside the city since yesterday morning. Now, he looked away from the trees and said, "There's no hurry." The sky gradually darkened, and the shops along the city streets hung up their lanterns. Chazhou had no taverns or tea houses, but due to the proliferation of human traffickers, there were plenty of brothels hiding in the remote corners of the city. Cai Yu had sent his aide to rally his people and call all the leaders within his own gang to report. These people lived off Cai Yu's money and had no real jobs to earn their keep. Instead, they spent their time bullying the weak and tyrannizing the city, patronizing the brothels and lazing around day in and day out. When they were summoned, they staggered out of the brothels holding up their pants and looking around with bleary eyes. Many were dead drunk. Afraid of offending them, Cai Yu's trusted aide coaxed them along, showering them with flattery just to get them to step out the door. While the bandits were taking roll call and lining up in ragged formation, Luo Mu and Kong Ling had also started mobilizing their forces. Kong Ling bowed to the various chiefs of the small gangs Luo Mu had supported in secret. As you are no doubt aware, Suzhou is here to sell grain. As long as we can weather the night, the price of rice tomorrow will be lower still. Talk is cheap, one bandit replied. How do you expect us to believe you with no proof? Kong Ling turned and gestured toward Luo Mu beside him. Perhaps my words can't be trusted, but surely you can believe the words of Luo Mu. Again and again, Luo Mu lent a hand to these gangs, funding them with a hefty sum of silver in the past 2 weeks alone. Cai Yu had come down hard on them in the last few days, leaving them too fearful to step out of their alleys during the day. They hadn't been included in the 1 tael for 5 dough deal offered to the other gangs. Cai Yu had driven them into a corner, and it was only thanks to Luo Mu's financial support that they were still standing. Of course they were willing to believe Luo Mu. Luo Mu cleared his throat. At present, all the granaries in the city are controlled by Cai Yu. His prices are too high. Even people like you and me can afford to eat, let alone the common folks. Suzhou has offered us a good price, close to Chudu's. But what's better is that Suzhou has promised never to inflate the price in the future. I've already signed the agreement with Suzhou. It's all down in black and white. The chiefs put their heads together to discuss amongst themselves. Kong Ling spoke again. I know everyone here is worried about the Yan clan, but it's better to make a clean break than prolong the agony. Instead of allowing the Yan clan to maintain its grip on Chazhou's throat via Cai Yu, why not set you and your brothers here free to make your own decisions? The only reason Cai Yu is willing to lower the price today is because he is threatened by Suzhou. If we cannot rid ourselves of him tonight, grain in Chazhou will return to its original price the moment Suzhou's grain wagons are out of sight. If Kong Ling wanted these men to work with him, he had to show them what they stood to gain. This was something he knew very well. Suzhou's intended final asking price was 1 tael of silver for 1 dan and 8 dough of rice. Yet Shen Zichuan had neglected to mention this number even once during these past few days of price reductions. They had been waiting for this moment to use this information to galvanize the people. Mari note, 1 dan and 8 dough of rice, 180 liters. Kong Ling paused dramatically before continuing. According to our vice commander, as long as everyone pitches in to take Cai Yu down, the price of grain will drop again from 1 tael for 1 dan and 3 dough to 1 dan and 6 dough, 160 liters. The moment these words were out, the bandit chiefs became feverish with excitement. The price of grain in Juexi was only 1 tael for 1 dan and 5 dough of rice, yet Suzhou was willing to offer an additional dough for the same price. The impact of such a promise far exceeded that of Cai Yu's small gesture of generosity. It was bigger than just grain. In this moment, the small gangs saw the possibility of a future for Chazhou. Most importantly, the money from the first batch of grain this autumn wouldn't come out of their own pockets, but those of Luo Mu. After kicking Cai Yu off his throne, Chazhou could also claim the contents of Cai Manor's granaries. With the combination of these 2 sources of grain, they wouldn't have to worry about getting through winter for the first time in years. Sounds of assent rose at once, and in no time, spirits were high. Kong Ling nodded at Luo Mu, then addressed the outspoken chief. Cai Yu's men are still within the city. Everyone, stay calm for now. We have a plan. Around midnight, Cai Yu's men marched out of the city gates. These bandits had looted their equipment from the armory that had once belonged to the garrison troops of Chazhou. Although the armor was old, it came complete with swords, sabers, and shields. At a glance, the troop of bandits might have passed for a proper army. When Cai Yu's aide had sent someone to check on Suzhou's porch booth that morning, there had been 1,000 or so migrants gathered outside the city. But now, when the man jogged out for a look, the crowd had swelled so much he couldn't see where it ended. The number of people had doubled at least. Cai Yu only had 1,500 men inside the city. The aide had brought 1,000 of those with him tonight. Yet, they seemed somewhat cowed as they gathered at the city gates. Why are there suddenly so many people here? One of the chiefs in the back craned his neck to look over the crowd. There's no end to them. The aide turned, smiling obsequiously back at the bandits. They're so hungry they can scarcely walk. You call these people? Excuse you. What's more important are the grain wagons. You heard my lord. As long as you take them down, we'll split the grain from Suzhou between all the chiefs here. The chiefs saw that they were indeed just refugees in rags, with a pathetic number of guards from Suzhou stationed around the edges. If the big boss has given his word, then we'll do it. See those guards from Suzhou? Let's divide up the wagons according to how many heads each of us takes. The more guards you kill, the larger your share of the spoils. The troop of bandits rubbed their palms together, eager for a fight. They didn't wait for the aide to give the command before they swarmed out of the gates. Shen Zichuan had just brought the bowl of porridge to his mouth when he heard the first cries of battle. A swarm of bandits charged down the public road, brandishing their blades and slashing indiscriminately at the crowd. Fortunately, the men from Suzhou were guarding the periphery. As the two parties clashed, Fei Sheng shouted toward the refugees, "Robbery! Cai Yu sent his men to steal Suzhou's grain." He shouted at the top of his lungs, but even this wasn't loud enough to carry over the din. However, the refugees around him were scared out of their wits. They jostled and bumped into one another as they took up the cry, yelling, "Robbery! Cai Yu has sent his men to steal the grain!" At this, one bandit chief was emboldened and roared with ferocious laughter. "We're here to take the grain, all right. Whoever dares stand in our way will die on our blades. Brothers, charge!" The Suzhou guards were too few to withstand the wave of onrushing bandits, and the refugees were right behind them. Many were instantly knocked down in the crush, and pained cries rang out as people were trampled underfoot. Seeing their helplessness, a cruel urge rose in the bandits. They yanked the infirm and vulnerable from the crowd and terrorized them, waving their blades in their faces. "We're not just taking the grain. We're here to kill." Okay. The bandits dragged a woman with a babe in her arms down the road by the hair, their gleaming blade frightening her so much that she shook as she wept and pled for her life. But these men were inured to every kind of atrocity. When they saw her wailing, they felt no pity, but instead burst out laughing. One lunged forward, swinging his saber toward the child in her arms. Bruh. A hand reached out from the crowd and grasped the man's blade. Sweeping the hem of his robe back, Qiao Tianya grinned. Killing is one thing, but why humiliate these people? All this weeping and wailing is making my ears ring. Make quick with that blade and get it over with. The bandit struggled in Qiao Tianya's grip, but the saber didn't budge. He bellowed, "Let go!" Seeing his face flush with effort, Qiao Tianya took a few steps back, forcing the chief to stagger forward with him. Shen Zichuan, standing behind his guards, chose this moment to intervene. "Are you done making a fool of that man? Qiao Yue. Let go and give him his blade back." "Of course, no problem," Qiao Tianya said. "I'll let go. I'm letting go right now." He had barely finished his taunt when, with a final tug, he released the man's blade. The bandit stumbled toward Qiao Tianya, who stepped aside to dodge him, then lifted his foot and delivered a swift kick to the bandit's ass. The man was sent flying into the crowd, landing directly at Shen Zichuan's feet. Oh, God. As he struggled to stand, his eyes followed that white robe upward. Just before they reached Shen Zichuan's chest, the tip of Avalanche's sheath pressed down on the crown of the man's head, preventing him from raising it any further. In a change from Shen Zichuan's usual stoic facade, his gaze was sharp and fierce, his tone righteous. "Suzhou is here to provide aid to the common folk of Chazhou. We can't help it if Cai Yu won't allow us into the city. Must you tear down the porridge tent too? Tear it down, then, if you must, but do not hurt these people." His voice was not loud, but it rang clear over the crowd around him. Chaozhou had suffered immensely under Cai Yu and the Yan clan's inflated grain prices, and the people were overwhelmed with sorrow and indignation. Upon hearing the sobs of the woman whom Qiao Tianya had rescued, several others began to weep as well. How could this bandit know he'd fallen right into his enemy's trap? All he remembered was the promise of spoils the other chief had mentioned earlier. Unable to raise his head higher, he braced his hands in the dirt and said scornfully, "Our big boss lords over Chaozhou. If he wants to tear this little tent down or kill these people, you think you can stop him?" Shen Zichuan's grip loosened on the sheath in his hand. "This grain." The bandit snatched up the blade that had fallen nearby and lunged upward, slashing at Shen Zichuan's chest. Qiao Tianya had already moved to intercept him, but the bandit was closer. The blade cut straight toward Shen Zichuan. In the instant before it met flesh, the bandit saw the composure in Shen Zichuan's eyes, as if he had been waiting for this very moment. There was a clang as Avalanche's sheath struck the flat of the bandit's blade, knocking it aside. Drops of crimson splattered Shen Zichuan's sleeve. A refugee next to Shen Zichuan cowered on the ground, paralyzed with terror. "They're killing people!" Qiao Tianya first thought the blood belonged to someone else, but upon closer inspection, he saw that Shen Zichuan's left hand was bleeding. Cries of alarm split the air. Far away over the heads of the crowd, Fei Sheng thundered with all his might, "Who dares harm my master?" I'm sorry, that's not funny. The embroidered uniform guard drew their blades in synchrony. From the moment Qiao Tianya had stopped the blade, one of the bandit chiefs at the rear of the cluster had recognized they encountered a formidable foe. He took a few quiet steps back and commanded, "Do as the big boss said. Cut them down." The bandit in front of Shen Zichuan was still surging forward. Qiao Tianya landed a kick in the center of his chest, sending the man sprawling onto the ground. Before he could draw his blade to finish him off, several refugees rushed out from behind Shen Zichuan, charging at the fallen bandit with nothing but their fists and feet. The entire crowd was roused to action, their anger cresting like a wave. They stampeded forward, colliding with the bandits without a care for their own lives. "Cai Yu, open up the stores! Bandits be gone! Leave our benefactor be!" Chapter 141. Into the Rain. Never in their wildest dreams had the bandits imagined these starving commoners would fight back. The deafening sounds of trampling feet was like a thunderstorm, a cacophony of curses and cries that engulfed the bandits like a surge of floodwater. The commoners threw caution to the wind as they shouted amid the chaos, "Bandit scum deserve to die!" The bandits were no match for so many. Stones and broken bowls flew in all directions, smashing recklessly and sending the bandits scurrying for cover. Seeing that the situation had taken a turn for the worse, that hesitant chief had a mind to flee. He looked back and was surprised to spot Cai Yu's aide already pelting back toward the city. "Son of a bitch!" the chief raged, taking to his heels after him. But he was less lucky than his fellows. The sharp-eyed Fei Sheng's hand deftly shot out and hauled him back. The chief was a common brute. He stood no chance against a well-trained member of the embroidered uniform guard. He stumbled back into the herd of people who swarmed him as he covered his face with his arms and rolled on the ground wailing. Remaining bandits were already rattled. At the sight of these commoners with faces twisted like evil spirits as they pummeled one of their chiefs, they abandoned the battle entirely and fled back toward the city. Cai Yu sat at a table in his manor awaiting news. The dishes before him had long gone cold. Hearing a sudden commotion outside, he leapt to his feet. Yet he had only taken a few steps when a servant stumbled in and reported in a panic, "My lord, there's a mob outside. They've surrounded our manor." Most of Cai Yu's men had been dispatched out of the city. He had retained no more than 500 people within the walls. Realization dawned on him, and he hissed through clenched teeth, "I've been tricked." In sending his men away, he'd given the small gangs the opening they were waiting for. "Tell the guards and the remaining men to keep an eye on every courtyard gate," Cai Yu said. "Bring me my cloak. I'm going out to meet them personally." Cai Yu draped his cloak over his shoulders and secured his broadsword, then briskly marched outside with his entourage. The main manor doors were tightly shut. Cai Yu peered through the gap and saw nothing but torches. Though his heart was heavy, he faked a laugh. And which young friend do we have here? I've no feast for celebration going on tonight. Why raise such a fuss coming over to give your congratulations? Outside, Luomu replied in a leisurely tone. Brother-in-law, I hear you're haunted by nightmares these days and can hardly sleep. I invited a couple of fellows to help dispel the evil energy in your manor. Cai Yu scowled when he recognized Luomu's voice. Mengzheng, I've always treated you well. I married my sister to you, yet you returned my benefaction with enmity. And here I thought you were a man of principles. Without batting an eye, Luomu retorted, Cai Yu, you took over the granaries and profited off the misfortune of others, abandoning the displaced and destitute commoners outside the city. You've long since deviated from the mold of the chivalrous bandit who robs the rich to feed the poor. As the prefect of Chazhou, I placated you for years so you would lower your guard. Now you've lost the hearts of the people. I advise you to drop your weapons and surrender while you still can. Cai Yu had never been good at masking his emotions. He was instantly apoplectic with rage. Shameless bastard! You were so sincere when you asked for my sister's hand in marriage, yet now you turn against me? You despicable coward! Luomu strode forward, unwilling to engage with Cai Yu any further. Open the doors and surrender, or we shall break them down. Who has the guts? Cai Yu hollered, gripping the broadsword hanging from his belt. My blade hasn't aged a bit. Anyone who dares take a step forward, I'll have his life. Though he made an imposing sight, Cai Yu couldn't withstand a siege on all sides. The guards in the Cai manor were ordinary men. When they saw the sinister glint of the swords awaiting them outside, they all had the urge to flee. Surrounded by his bodyguards, Cai Yu avoided a volley of arrows that arced out of the darkness. I'll handsomely reward anyone who guards the manor. Young Master Yan personally put me in charge of Chazhou. He even calls me Pa. Luomu, if you harm a hair on my head tonight, the young master will ensure you pay it back twofold. Before Luomu could respond, he heard Kongling speak up beside him. To whom does Chazhou belong? It's bad enough you're content being the Yan clan's lapdog. Now you want the commoners of Chazhou to grovel with you? You're the accomplice to a tyrant. How many innocent commoners have died because of you? If we accomplish nothing else tonight, we will take you down. The moment the words left Kongling's mouth, the men behind Luomu surged forward and smashed open the main gates of the outer court. Yet Cai Yu refused to resign himself to his fate. He and the few remaining men in his residence fought bitterly even as they retreated. In under an hour, they had been forced back to the innermost courtyard of the estate. In the vast darkness of the night, Cai Yu had become a rat in the trap. He had spent half his life hailed as a hero among the commoners, yet in the end, he had cast his reputation into the dirt for the sake of money. At the sight of his fortune going up in flames, of his wives and children weeping, he felt the grief of a hero making his last stand. It was too late now for regrets. Filled with contempt over Luomu's betrayal, Cai Yu was determined to fight until the end. The streets outside the Cai manor became a scene of pandemonium as various gangs joined the fray. Cai Yu's men fell one after another. Just as he had completely lost heart and was preparing to take his own life, he heard a cry from amid the chaos. Brother! Luomu cursed this ill-timed arrival. He turned back and shouted, Take the young madam away! Concubine Cai had been coddled all her life, yet she had run the whole way here in her haste, losing her embroidered shoes and falling and scraping her hands. She spared not a thought for her sweat-soaked hair as she pointed a trembling finger at Luomu. For all her fiery tempers, her choking sobs were utterly sincere. Luomu, you... She burst into fresh tears. You vile, despicable man! Though he knew Kongling was watching, Luomu couldn't help but step toward her. Concubine Cai's hair was disheveled, but she held her head high amid this scene of carnage. She spat at Luomu, tears streaming down her face. I gave my heart to a dog! How could I have been deceived by a bastard like you? She and Cai Yu were siblings with a large age gap. Although she was his younger sister by birth, Cai Yu had raised the girl like his own daughter. The two had grown up depending on each other and were as close as could be. Seeing Cai Yu surrounded on all sides, concubine Cai understood her brother would not escape death tonight. She covered her face and wailed, "It was I who ruined you, brother." The instant Kongling saw concubine Cai cover her face, he knew it boded ill. He blurted out, "Quick, stop her!" But it was too late. Concubine Cai pulled a golden hairpin from her hair. In the blink of an eye, blood splattered over her silk brocades. Cai Yu was overcome with grief at the sight of his sister sinking to the ground. As his enemies looked on, tears streamed down his face, and he threw his head back and cried out, "My silly little sister! It is clearly I who have ruined you." There was no more thought of taking his own life. With a deafening bellow, he charged the bandits surrounding him, hacking men down until, exhausted, he could go on no longer. Yet even with his last breath, he shouted, "I am Cai Yu of Chazhou. This is how I meet my end." When the first glimmer of dawn appeared on the horizon, the strife in the city had ceased. Half the walls encircling the Cai manor had collapsed, the prosperous image of yesterday having evaporated overnight. Attendants and maidservants swept gold and silver ornaments from the residence into their bundles as they fled into the first light of morning. Kongling stood beside the body of concubine Cai and watched the pool of blood slowly stain the hem of his robe. Cai Yu's entire family had lost their lives to the bandits' blades. Kongling waited for Luo Mu to come and collect concubine Cai's body for burial, only to hear from an attendant that Luo Mu had gone to see the Cai clan's granaries. Kongling stood where he was and waited until past noon. Luo Mu never came. With the death of Cai Yu, all the grain stores in Chazhou came under Luo Mu's charge. He now possessed both Cai Yu's grain and Cai Yu's wealth. Suzhou's grain wagons entered the city at last, but the money he had promised Suzhou never materialized. The price of grain in the city remained 1 tael for 1 dan of rice, the same price Cai Yu had set when he was alive. "I'm sorry now, what?" Standing in the courtyard, Fei Sheng lamented. "Back when I was still working in the imperial prison, I often heard that son of a bitch Han Cheng speak of the difficulty of regional missions and how the local bosses were all awfully shrewd. Their reputation is well-deserved. They're far craftier than the capital officials, that's for sure." Qiao Tianya pillowed his arm behind his head as he lay on a stone bench and basked in the sun. No wonder he survived as the prefect of Chazhou all these years. He's a real piece of work, that one. Beside them, Kongling was silent as he brewed tea. Shun Zichuan, who had been in the main room, lifted the hanging screen and emerged. As the three of them made to get up, Shun Zichuan motioned for them to stay where they were. "What time is it now?" Fei Sheng jumped to be first to reply. "Almost noon." Shun Zichuan had come out holding his folding fan. Standing under the blinding sun, he shook open the fan and held it up to shade his eyes. "Chazhou has scored a victory, but we've yet to celebrate. Send Luo Mu an invitation. We'll drink and feast here tonight." Fei Sheng acknowledged his orders and inquired, "Master, what if he doesn't dare to come?" Shun Zichuan tipped up his fan to reveal his eyes. With a smile in his voice, he said, "You think he doesn't dare? It seems to me this man would dare anything." Hearing the edge in his voice, Fei Sheng hurried out to deliver the invitation. Kongling had spent the past few days drinking and gambling, to all appearances having so much fun he had no intention of going home. Yet he stood up briskly when he saw Shun Zichuan descending the steps. "I heard it was Mr. Cheng Feng who paid for concubine Cai's burial," said Shun Zichuan. "Oh." Kongling tucked his hands into his sleeves. His fingers brushed the remaining fried soybeans from his last trip to the gambling den. "Yes, it was me." Shun Zichuan closed his folding fan and studied Kongling for a moment. Kongling imagined Shun Zichuan was displeased, but he didn't feel like explaining himself. Yet to his surprise, Shun Zichuan dropped the subject and drank half a cup of tea without probing further. Suddenly remembering the wound Shun Zichuan had suffered on his left palm that night, Kongling felt another wave of exhaustion. He seemed to have barely done anything on this trip, yet he was more tired than he had ever been in Suzhou. To Fei Shang's surprise, Luo Mu not only arrived promptly that evening, he came alone. The cook in Shan Zichuan's manor was newly hired, and though his culinary skills were more than adequate, Shan Zichuan hadn't asked for any elaborate preparations. Although he had proclaimed the meal a feast, the dishes were only slightly more refined than his usual fare. Refugees still littered the roads in Chazhou, and as such, Shan Zichuan ate simply as well. After 3 rounds of wine, the atmosphere between the parties grew convivial. Fei Shang noted that both Shan Zichuan and Luo Mu remained cordial, neither displaying any sign of discontent over the delay of the last few days. Luo Mu lifted his cup in a toast. Now that everything's in place, we're ready to discuss the trade of grain. I've been wondering, when does the vice commander plan to leave? It'll be easier for me to get my advisors to draft a plan if I have a date to work with. Cai Yu had been dead for 3 days. The trade agreement between Suzhou and Chazhou had been discussed and settled long before they acted. Yet Luo Mu was now trying to stall for time and run circles around Shan Zichuan. Luo Mu had said it himself to Kong Ling. Every extra dough of grain per tael was an equivalent reduction in profit. Real silver was at stake here. Now that this money was in his hands, giving it up was harder than he'd imagined. A pair of musicians, a girl and her blind old man, were in the hall singing a tune. Shan Zichuan watched the old man play the erhu, tapping his fingers gently on his fan as though he hadn't heard Luo Mu's question. Only after the tune was finished did Shan Zichuan respond with a smile. I'm on a tight schedule. It'll be in the next day or 2. Luo Mu frowned, as if thinking hard. 2 days is too much of a rush. Can the vice commander not stay a few more days? You have yet to visit many of Chazhou's most beautiful spots. Shan Zichuan shifted his gaze to Luo Mu's face. My family at home is as anxious for my return as I am. His answer had been gentle, but Luo Mu instantly curbed his frivolity. He straightened up in his seat and said, solemn, I see. How about this then? The vice commander may return home, and when we've drafted a satisfactory plan, I'll send someone over with it. Cheng Feng may stay to oversee things on behalf of Suzhou. Kong Ling drew breath to speak, but Shan Zichuan tapped his fan lightly against the edge of the table, and he kept his mouth shut. Fan in his fingers, Shan Zichuan fixed his eyes on Luo Mu and raised his voice to call to the blind old man. Play another tune, one from Chazhou. Doesn't Chazhou have that song, To Kill a Bandit? The blind man gave a slight nod and shifted aside so his granddaughter could take up the pipa and start playing. Shan Zichuan did not acknowledge Luo Mu's suggestion, and Luo Mu, sitting across from him, didn't dare bring up the idea again. Initially, he could still look Shan Zichuan in the eye, but as the tune took on a murderous tone, he began to sweat profusely. Shan Zichuan lifted the lid of his teacup. This tea was a gift from your excellency. It's fine tea. Is it from Huzhou? Luo Mu forced a laugh. We found it during our search of the Cai manor. I'm afraid I'm no expert when it comes to tea, so it's better gifted to the vice commander. Shan Zichuan chuckled. I don't like tea. The girl's fingers slid along the pipa strings, each strum like blades slicing through the air, perforating Luo Mu's eardrums. Before long, his back was soaked with sweat. The song seemed to go on interminably. Their tableful of dishes had gone cold, the most striking of which were the large lion's head meatballs in front of him. By the time Luo Mu got up to leave, his legs had gone numb. Shan Zichuan stood under the eaves and said to Fei Shang, Escort His Excellency back. It's a rather long journey. Luo Mu forced himself to bow, glancing at Kong Ling several times before finally following Fei Shang out the door. Less than 4 hours later, the previously agreed-upon deal, documents, and money were delivered to Shan Zichuan's manor. As Luo Mu lay awake in the middle of the night, he was struck by a single thought. Shan Zichuan had known all along what Luo Mu planned to do. Luo Mu had hoped to send Shan Zichuan off and wait for the message from the Yan clan, originally meant for Cai Yu. Cai Yu was no more, but Luo Mu could rise to the occasion. He could do exactly what Cai Yu had done for the Yan clan, The price of grain Suzhou offered was indeed low, but that was only good for commoners. There was nothing in it for Luo Mu. Even the small profit he had made when he worked under Cai Yu might be lost. He had initially thought that, as Shen Zichuan hadn't brought many men along, the vice commander wouldn't dare lay a hand on him. If Luo Mu could successfully stall him, then even before Shen Zichuan reached Suzhou again, Luo Mu would already have made contact with the Yan clan. When the time came for Suzhou to return to collect on their debt, he would have a backing and confidence to reject their trade agreement. Yet tonight, Shen Zichuan's message had been loud and clear. He had seen straight through Luo Mu's ploy. He was in a rush to settle this business, and if Luo Mu beat around the bush and placed his hopes on the Yan clan of Hezhou instead, Shen Zichuan would simply kill Luo Mu now. That song had been as pointed a response as a sword to the throat. Closing his eyes, Luo Mu recalled Shen Zichuan's handling of the bandits outside the city walls. A man who dared put his own life on the line for his goals wasn't concerned with the consequences of killing Luo Mu. Long before they had agreed to move against Cai Yu, Shen Zichuan had said that he and Kong Ling were here to do business. In hindsight, Luo Mu realized that those words had been an early warning from Shen Zichuan to him. 2 days later, Shen Zichuan assigned Fei Sheng to remain in Chaozhou, where he could continue recording the prices of staples and keep an eye on Luo Mu. Suzhou's grain wagons entered the granaries, while the shopkeeper from the cosmetic shop kept track of the accounts. With this, the grain trade between Suzhou and Chaozhou was established. The price Shen Zichuan had settled on with Zhou Gui and the others back in Suzhou was 1 tael of silver for 1 dan and 8 dough of rice. But it had ended up a little higher, 1 tael for 1 dan and 6 dough. However, the price was still lower than that of Juexi. As part of buying grain from Suzhou, Luo Mu not only had to set up tents to hand out porridge, he also had to think about how to make the most of the money he spent. Chaozhou's most pressing problem was the re-implementation of the household register. He now held the food supply of all the minor bandits in his hands. He could easily enlist them into the garrison troops. There were still details to be hammered out, but they could be discussed when the bulk of the grain arrived from Suzhou. And with Fei Sheng remaining behind, Shen Zichuan would also have eyes on the movements of the Yan clan in Hezhou. He had successfully dismantled 2 of the Yan clan's major agents in Zhongbo, and the Yan clan was not the kind of family to take this lying down. The two had initially had nothing to do with each other, but now the Yan clan was forced to turn their attention to Zhongbo and to Shen Zichuan. Shen Zichuan didn't stay any longer than necessary. He climbed into his carriage that very day and left the city. As they approached the border of Chaozhou's territory, they heard the sounds of a carriage racing to catch up to them. Qiao Tianya lifted a corner of the curtain and whispered to Shen Zichuan inside. "It's Luo Mu." He had come to see them off. Qiao Tianya deflected him with an excuse that Shen Zichuan was unwell today, and Luo Mu didn't press the issue. He had mainly come to see Kong Ling anyway. The 2 men got out of their carriages and walked for a while along the public road. Luo Mu produced some pastries wrapped in oil paper from inside his lapels. "You loved these back when we were students. I saw someone selling these when I left the manor and bought them on a whim. Take them with you for the road." Kong Ling looked at the oil paper wrapper. "That was so many years ago. Yet you still remember?" Luo Mu smiled ruefully. "Yes, I ought to remember." "Will you come back with the grain wagons?" Kong Ling accepted the package and walked in silence for a moment. He didn't answer. Luo Mu stared at Kong Ling the way he always had, all those years ago. Holding the bundle of pastries, Kong Ling said suddenly, "Back then, when we completed our education, you asked if I was going to Chengdu, and I didn't answer. Eventually, we went our separate ways. Did you ever go back to visit the school?" "After I left school," Luo Mu answered, "I went west with my family. We spent several years living in Chengdu." Kong Ling turned back and finally met Luo Mu's eyes. "Mengzhang." Luo Mu waited, but Kong Ling did not continue. Luo Mu couldn't help but laugh. "While I was in Chengdu, I heard you went to work for Tan Tai Long. He was a good official. and you did great things together. Why didn't you ever marry? Why didn't you ever marry? Kongling repeated the words to himself in silence and slowly started laughing. He was already an old man, yet at this moment, he gave off the same aura of gentleness and composure he had possessed in his youth. There was still will and spirit in those eyes, even if they were no longer so bright as they had once been. Clutching the packet of pastries, he said, "I should go." The wind skated over the blades of grass. Kongling turned without waiting for Luomu's reply. Luomu stood and watched Kongling's sleeves flutter amid the breeze. His throat tightened. He couldn't help taking a step after him, nor reaching out with his hand. The dusting of white in Kongling's hair seemed to disperse in the wind, covered by the dancing leaves swirling past. Dazed, Luomu felt he was seeing through time to a moment many years ago. Kongling had missed a great number of things in his life, but not because he didn't fight for them. He had once tossed and turned in bed over an invitation, yet all that had greeted him after pacing to and fro as he waited in the school courtyard was a downpour of summer rain. He'd waited in the rain until his eyes were wet. After that, he'd traveled far from home and settled in a distant land. Luo Mengzheng was a fickle man. That day in the rain, Kong Chung Feng had come to understand this. Many years later, he waited again. Yet all he had to show for this endeavor was a blood-stained hymn. Both times, Luomu did not come, and after today, Kongling and Luomu would never cross paths again. Well, I covered way more than I was intending to, but that's okay. Let's just go ahead and talk about these many freaking chapters that I have read. Technically, it was just one chapter more than I intended, but yeah, we're just gonna start. And we're going to chapter 135, not 35, Lord Jesus. Earring. Okay. So I actually did not have a lot to say about this chapter, except for the fact that it's just interesting to know that banditry was an issue since before the years of Yongyi. Like, this has just been a continuously ignored problem, and it has festered into something so awful. So then, of course, we have this Cai Yu, right, leader of the bandits in Chazhou, and he found Lei Chongming filthy because of him being a rapist and a woman beater and a murderer of the innocent, just throwing it all together, right? And so I was like, yeah, that's to the well. We already said to the well with Lei Chongming, but thank you for just verifying to the well. And so, he's like, there are just certain lines you don't cross, right? Which we're going to get back to that. But, yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about that chapter. So then when we move forward to the next chapter, 136, Sowing Discord, I ain't gonna lie, I got excited. I got very, very excited. And I think this is a chapter I have the most to say things about. So, of course, we have that the whole mindset when it comes to bandits is the bandits in Mount Luo needed to be fought, right? That was the only way to win things in that regard. Whereas here in Chazhou, you have to scheme against the bandits. I mean, eventually a fight did break out, but you had to, like, Shen Zichuan's thought process was like, we need to show them that we're smarter, essentially, and put them in a difficult position. Because Lei Chongming and Lei Jingjia, they were wanting to expand, right? Cai Yu wasn't wanting to do that. He just wanted to keep the control that he had where he was, and that was pretty much it. So the approaches to these bandits had to be different. And we have in Chazhou, these bandits, y'all, were running wild everywhere. Most of the people couldn't even be classified as good citizens. So the idea was at some point, okay, why not make them into military men then? Because they can't go on the registry as civilized citizens, if you will. But this plan that was made by the nobles, it didn't work for the circumstances of Chazhou. They didn't consider Chazhou at all, these people in the Eastern Palace. So I just say stupid Eastern Palace, because they're like, oh, one thing that works over here should be able to work over there. But you have to look at what's actually going on in the place that you're trying to create solutions for. Okay, whatever. So then we move forward and we have bandits like Cai Yu. He was initially willing to share his wealth, right? He was seen as a more benevolent person than even the scholars. But people just were not realizing that he was actually living off of their suffering. And over time, of course, it was growing, the resentment was growing, but still, So then we have this whole thing where there was supposed to be a loan of grain to Dreschi for disaster relief that was promised that never came. And so this is why people turned to banditry. And then Cai Yu used to help the poor, and he eventually later partnered with the Yan clan to profit on grain and push out the Shi clan. So at this point, it was no longer about the people. It was just about the nobles, yet again, trying to figure out how to take each other down and not considering the effect that they were having on citizens. I just want to strangle all of the noble clans. Is that something that I can do? Anyway, we have that Sun Tzu basically, he comes up with this idea where he wants it to be bandit versus bandit. Okay. He wants rumors of discontent to be spread around from the smaller bandit groups, saying about Cai Yu that he's, benefiting off the people and all of this stuff like that. And so he was like, what will happen is Cai Yu will want to beat up those smaller bandits, right? And then Luo Mu can offer them grain and can offer them other things to basically get them on his side. And it all worked out that way. But anyway, as we keep going, we have one of these days where Xiao Chuye's gift finally arrives. The milk is spoiled. Tea leaves, perfectly fine. But even though Qiao Chenya and Fei Sheng are probably like, I don't get it. What are we doing here? It's spoiled. Not probably, they were. Sun Tzu got the sentiment. And I loved that whole thing so much. I'm not even going to re-explain it, but I just loved the sentiment and was glad to know that he understands Xiao Chuye so much, that he knows what his intent was. So then, when we move to the next chapter, which is chapter 137, letter reading, we have it that Yao Wenyu is the one who conducted Hai Liangyi's funeral for obvious reasons. But after that, all of those students, those scholars, man, they were tearing him down, basically, rioting and all of that stuff. And there's no telling what would have happened to him. And now he's just vanished. And so again, this goes to one of the comments I made on one of my previous videos of where people may be upset about something and they might be rightfully so upset. But then they decide to make decisions that aren't benefiting anyone. Not saying all of the decisions are like that, but doing stuff like holding a sword and waving it at it and threatening Kong Qiu is not a solution. Being mad at Yao Wenyu because he learned under Hai Liangyi but did not want to take the same route, what does that solve? And I think this is a particularly important topic because sometimes people feel like just because you were taught something, or something was instilled in you means that you by default have to pursue that thing. And it's one of those scenarios where Hai Liangyi took Yao Wenyu on as a student and he learned a lot, sure, but that did not mean that he had to follow in his teacher's footsteps. And some of y'all may be angry about it just because Hai Liangyi was so picky with his student choices and essentially only had one, but that sounds like a personal problem. Yao Wenyu has the life that he wants to live. Who's to say that he has to do exactly what it is that y'all wanted him to do just because of the privilege that he was given, And I'm sure, Hai Liangyi probably knew this already, but still was like, I'm going to teach this guy. Why not? And so anyway, it's like y'all tearing him down is not going to solve a problem at all. But anyway, he has vanished. And Xiao Tianya wants to know where he is. So there's that. We also have Sun Tzu getting a temporary fan, but still waiting for Xiao Chuye to give him a new one. So then we go to the next thing with Luo Mu and concubine Cai, where he's indulging in her for a little bit in his correspondence, his plan of what he's going to do, that Sun Tzu gave. He haphazardly just kind of left it out there. And concubine Tsai saw it, and she delivered it to her brother, some way, somehow, so that he could know. So Tsai was not happy about that, and he was like, boy, if it wasn't for the fact that my sister loved you, you'd be dead already, sir. Which I thought was just hilarious. But anyway, as we keep going on, we have Shen Zichuan. He writes a letter to Xiao Chuye. And this letter, oh my gosh, this letter. It's just so sweet. I was just like, oh, he misses his Xiao Chuye. I wasn't expecting his letter to say those words. You know, not to say that Shen Zichuan isn't lovey-dovey and stuff. I just wasn't expecting it from him in that moment. So I loved it so much. And we know he's already having a hard time sleeping anyway. So yes, we need them to reunite so that they can sleepy boo boo bye bye together. But moving forward, we also have like going to a scene with Xiao Chuye and the Imperial Army and the Libe Armored Cavalry. They're eating separately. And the Libe Armored Cavalry is looking down on the Imperial Army, really, for how rowdy and excitable they are, you know, because they're too dignified for that kind of thing. And it's just like, y'all, I get it that they also have the element of surprise in their favor, but who just came to save the day? They did. So, like, don't be looking down on them. The Imperial Army has some good things going for them, okay? I am rooting for the Imperial Army. So, anyway, once we get to the next chapter, which is chapter 138, Strategist. Boy. We have, yes, Cai Yu acted exactly as planned. He beat up some of the smaller bandit groups, but then he offered a sucky deal to the other ones. And so, of course, they went to Luomu instead. Now, here's the thing about Cai Yu. This man used to be a highwayman. I believe it's the highwayman, right? Who would steal from the rich, give to the poor. But he decided his own personal wealth was more important, right? Not only that, but he's not good at peopling, as I call it, managing people and knowing how to deal with situations and how to read the room, essentially, and navigate those things. So he doesn't know how to manage his own business that he has properly. Not to mention he's under the Yan clan, so there's that. So what we have is there are people in Chaozhou who are selling their kids because they're so hungry. They're selling their kids in Fanzhou, when Fanzhou is struggling too, but the brothels are open. They're turning these people into prostitutes and everything, and if they die, they die. They can always get more new people, which just really, bruh's really sucky. So then the plan is to wait until the smaller bandits groups are fed up with Cai Yu and the way he's acting and everything, and then go ahead and plan to sell the grain outside the city walls. And if they can't afford it, then Luomu should help. And I thought that was funny because Luomu was like, I mean, if they can't afford it, then what are we going to do? And Shen Zichuan was like, you pay. Ain't you got a little pretty penny? You pay. Which was lovely. And so anyway, Lanzhou, he wants Kongling, but Kongling does not want Lanzhou because he fears him. He also does not understand him. And he doesn't really fully have a grasp on what Shen Zichuan's goals are as he does with Zhou Gui. So that is what it is. But Shen Zichuan really needs a strategist, someone who's good at this thing to help him go against Xue Xiuzhuo. Anyway, then we also learn that, of course, Shen Zichuan is only wearing white in honor of mourning Qi Huilian. That's all I'm going to say on that. I don't want to talk about it anymore. We're just going to move ahead to chapter 139, The Price of Grain, which was a very, very fun chapter for me to read. At least I think it was this one. Yes. Grain, my notes say. Cai Yu doesn't lower the grain price, we find, because the Yan clan needs to make a certain amount of money. And he doesn't want his own pockets to take a hit. If he lowers the grain price, then he is going to have to pay out of his pocket to the Yan clan so they can still get their due. Okay. That's all I have to say on that. So anyway, Eventually, they set up the stations outside of the city walls, and Cai Yu was indeed provoked to lower his price of grain. And at first he's like, do they really have the audacity to do this? Like, they didn't even lower their price, talking about Suzhou. They didn't even put the price at something that's admirable or something that is better. They're no better than the Yan clan and the rest of them. So he's like, I'll lower my price. How about that? And immediately, I was reminded of a C-drama called My Heroic Husband with Guo Qilin and Song Yi. I could be wrong about her. Guo Qilin for sure. Love it so much. And I'm not going to give a spoiler, but it reminded me of that. And I was just like, ha ha ha, this is so funny. So anyway, basically what we have is Shen Zichuan and the rest of them, are out there feeding the poor and the needy, and they lower the price again. And Cai Yu, what does he do? He lowers the price again as well. And what ends up happening is that all the blame is put on Cai Yu for Suzhou not being able to sell grain within the city. And Shen Zichuan is even having a physician there to check over the people, and he's paying for the expense of this, right? Amazing. I love this guy so much. Shen Zichuan is just everything. He's everything, okay? Yes. So then we move forward and we have Cai Yu lowers his price again. But the trick in this is that even if he somehow survived, he would not be able to raise those prices again later after having lowered them and then lowered them and then lowered them again. And so now Cai Yu is pissed and he's ready for a real fight. So when we move to chapter 140, City Outskirts, what we have is, oops, my thingy keeps poppity-boopity-ding. What we have is that for 2 days and a night, they have been outside, they as in the people from Suzhou, serving these people, these refugees. And I have to just give a quick shout out to Qiao Tianya, because he mentioned this to Shen Zichuan and he was like, you can step back now. I was like, oh, look at you taking good care of your master, because your master is just going and going and going. And then, of course, Shen Zichuan is like, there's no harm in staying a little bit later. And so he's like, okay, at least stand back next to the wagon, like it's all the same. Like, just give yourself a little woosah, please. And Shen Zichuan's like, there's no need to rush. We're okay. And so then when we move forward, we have that Suzhou has promised these smaller bandit groups that the grain price will not inflate later. So the deal that they have it at now, which was, I think, 1 dan, 6 do. Yes. It will not, the price will not change later, the one tael. So that really gets these guys excited. They're ready to fight on Luomu/Chazhou civilian sides to go ahead and take down Cai Yu. And so what happens is so many people had already been there for the grain in the first place, right? But now there's even more people there. It's just, you can't even see where one person ends and where the other person begins, right? And so, moving with that, I have my note about Cai Yu. Because here this man is, who has the audacity to think himself better than Lei Chongming just because he's not a rapist and a murderer of the innocent. But, and again, it's not the same crime, obviously, and there are different emotional turmoils that come with it and everything. But here you are, depriving the people of a livelihood and literally their lives because you care more about money. So you too are a murderer. Just you're not doing it with your sword, at the current moment at least, cutting people down. But here's the other thing that I want to say, because some people feel like that just because they aren't the ones doing the crime, that they aren't as bad as those who are. But all of these bandits that come out to fight the embroidered uniform guard, right? They go ballistic. They see all of these people and they're just like, ha ha ha, let's go ahead and murder these people, these innocent lives. Let's take them and terrorize them as much as we can. And so you have these cries of these people who are being trampled, they're helpless and everything. And they're just excited about this. And even there's a bandit who drags a woman with her baby in her arms. And it's just dragging them as he's, going crazy. And it said that these men were inured to every kind of atrocity. Inured, meaning they were accustomed to this. Cai Yu, these bandits that are under your command, you have allowed them to do so many atrocities. And this is just one thing they're doing. I'm sure some of them were probably raping women. I'm sure some of them were doing trafficking. I'm sure plenty of them were just terrorizing and killing people at all they wanted. And so it's like for you to think yourself so high and mighty and above Lei Chongming just because he, violated a child and then, beat a woman to death because she refused to be violated. Sir, I think you need a major reality check, a major reality check. So anyway, moving forward from my tiny little thing on that, we have a bandit that specifically goes towards Shen Zichuan after, Qiao Tianya was messing around with him a bit. And basically, Shen Zichuan ends up getting bleeding from his hand, right? It's been cut. And I love this moment because it's in that moment where all of the people, these refugees, see him hurt, see the bandit about to come, and they're like, holy no, you were not about to mess with our benefactor. Not only that, but I was like, okay, Fei Sheng, because actually my thing says Fei Sheng Beast Unlocked, because he was like, who dares harm my master? But anyway, the refugees, seeing the man who has been helping them for the past 2 days and 1 night getting attacked or about to be harmed / was harmed, they're like, oh, absolutely not. And so they just go ballistic. And I love that. They're crowding all on these bandits, and these bandits are trying to run away now. And they're like, oh my God, we can't escape. Ah! And it's really funny. And then even one of the bandits, he's thinking of escaping, and he already sees like Cai Yu's aide is escaping. And he's like, son of a beep. And it's like, yeah, like Cai Yu don't care about y'all. His aide don't care about y'all. Y'all can stay in the thick of heat, in the heat of trouble while he runs away. So then eventually Cai Yu, when someone comes running and he's like, they're outside and they're about to like destroy us now, he realized that he has been tricked. And it's like, yes, you have been tricked, my guy. How does it feel? Ha 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 is all I could say on my note. Actually, just 3 ha's, and I definitely added some more, but it is what it is. So then we have the fighting taking place, right? And then what happens? Concubine Cai Yu's little sister, comes out crying and like, oh my gosh, I married a bastard. It's so wicked. How blah, 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 crying. And then it says on page 325, though he knew Kongling was watching, Luomu couldn't help but step toward her. I highlighted, though he knew Kongling was watching, just the same as I took note of in an earlier chapter when it said that Luomu was talking to Kongling, and then suddenly he remembered, oh yeah, Shen Zichuan is there, and addressed him as well. Because remember in my last video or so, I was like, anybody else feeling these vibes? Y'all know the vibes I'm talking about. Yeah, these were the vibes that I was talking about. So anyway, this girl, she's like, oh, I gave my heart to a dog, blah, blah, snore, and she decides to kill herself. Honestly, okay, sure, fine, whatever. So the thing is that's really sad is that Kongling actually waited right there once everything was done, waited by this dead body of a girl, waiting for Luomu to come collect the body of his woman. And he doesn't show. He does not show at all. And then we have it where Luomu did not hand over the promised money to Zizhou and kept all of the grain as the same price that Cai Yu had. 1 dan of rice for 1 tael. 1 dan being 10 liters. So I was just like, sir, you better get it together. I don't think you actually understand who it is that you're messing with. But okay. All right. Actually, I just put in my note, bastard. That's exactly what my note says. That's it. So then anyway, we have Shanzi Chuan and him. They're having a quote unquote feast, but not really. It's a modest feast together. And they're being very cordial with each other. And I have to point this out on page 328. It says, refugees still littered the roads in Chaozhou, and as such, Shanzi Chuan ate simply as well. I love this because it just shows, like, it's a testament to his character. There is so much hardship going on. And it's not the case where, you just, in everyday life, you're in the world, there are some people who are homeless, some people have money, and you live your life. But he went to a city to be the solution to the problem. And so in having a feast, he was not going to be too extravagant because the whole place is in such turmoil. And I just respected that. I mean, I wouldn't have had a problem per se if he had a real feast, but, just speaks to his character. So anyway, Luo Mu is trying to stall on, this whole agreement so that he could hopefully contact the Yan clan first and then reject Shanzi Chuan. But Shanzi Chuan isn't an idiot, and he already knew this man was going to do this, right? So he decides to threaten Luo Mu with music to kill a bandit. Because ultimately, that kind of is what Luo Mu was attempting to be. Or that's exactly what he was acting like in the moment. I'm sorry, sir. You were going to be acting just like the bandits. So yeah, he was like, okay, I don't mind killing you if that's what you would like, Luo Mu. Someone else can take your place. And so it was like less than 4 hours later that previously agreed upon deal documents and money were delivered to Shanzi Chuan's manor. And yeah. Yep. I was like, sir, I don't know what you were thinking, but you clearly weren't. So then, of course, when they're finally on their way back home, we have Kong Ling and Luo Mu. They have a moment, and it's clear that something was between them before, but nothing ever really came out of it. So that's just pretty much the end of that. Glad to know that my spidey senses were spideying correctly. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this extra long reading today. Because tomorrow's is going to be extra long as well. We have chapters 142 to 146, I believe, which technically it won't be as long as today's because I tacked on an extra chapter today. So yeah, this is page 337 out of 388 pages. 39 if you count the picture at the end. Oh, well, there are words after that. So the point is, yeah, I hope you all enjoyed. Please let me know your thoughts and reactions in the comments section. I cannot wait to hear what you all think. And I have made sure to release these last two videos in a timely manner so that everybody on YouTube and Patreon can hopefully be caught up. You'll have some extra days. For sure, I think for YouTube, Wednesday is going to be the last day that these are posted. So I'm kind of putting them at the same time so that everyone can join in the live on Saturday, where we officially crack open volume 5 of Ballad of Sword and Wine. So again, last upload on Wednesday on YouTube, and you'll have Thursday and Friday to catch up if you need to. And even Saturday morning, we will be meeting at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I hope you all are ready to get going, because we are in the final stretch of volume 4 and we're almost to volume 5. So without rambling on too much longer, I'll just say, 我爱你们.